The world of Bikini Bottom had fallen into a deep, velvety silence. Outside, the ocean shimmered faintly in the silver light of the moon, waves moving slow and sleepy against the coral reefs. The streets were empty, not even a jellyfish floated by. The sea plants swayed lazily, as though dreaming themselves. Inside his pineapple home, SpongeBob SquarePants lay curled beneath a soft blue blanket. His alarm clock on the nightstand ticked in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, the kind that fills the quiet with comfort. Each tick seemed to echo in the stillness of the house, mingling with the faint, bubbling hum of the ocean outside. He was deep in half-sleep, that strange, cozy space between dream and waking, when it happened a small sound, low but undeniable. Grumble. His eyes fluttered open, round and drowsy. Another soft rumble. He blinked a few times, letting his mind catch up. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the plumbing. It was his stomach. A sleepy smile crossed his face. "Oh, stomach," he whispered in the quiet, his voice barely above the hum of the night. "You're hungry too, huh?" He lay still for a moment longer, staring up at the ceiling, where faint light from his window painted rippling patterns that looked like moonlight underwater. Everything felt so peaceful, so still, that even his hunger felt gentle, not demanding. More like a quiet nudge, a reminder that something warm and delicious might make the night even cozier. SpongeBob slowly pushed back his blanket. The fabric made a soft woof sound as it settled, like a sigh. He sat up, wearing his tiny nightcap, the tip of it drooping softly over one eye. His slippers, shaped like little jellyfish, waited patiently beside his bed. He slipped his feet into them, careful not to make a sound, and stood up with the care of someone who didn't want to wake the entire ocean. The house was steeped in shadows, but not the scary kind. These were sleepy, soft-edged shadows, touched by the blue glow of the moon filtering through his round window. Dust motes floated lazily through the light, like tiny dreams that hadn't decided where to land. He yawned, long and slow, the kind that makes your whole body sway. Then, still smiling faintly, he padded quietly toward the door. The wooden floor creaked just a whisper as he tiptoed past Gary's little bed. Gary was curled up in his shell, eyes closed, letting out the tiniest murp every few breaths. A single soap bubble rose from his mouth with each exhale, drifting up and popping with a faint sparkle before the next one appeared. SpongeBob watched for a second, charmed, then whispered softly, "Sleep tight, buddy. I'll bring you something nice." The door to his bedroom opened with a soft creak, and the air of the rest of the house greeted him cooler, quieter, filled with the faint scent of sea salt and something sweet, like leftover sponge cake from the afternoon. The kitchen lay at the far end of the hallway, and from here he could see the faint reflection of moonlight glimmering on its tiled floor. SpongeBob tiptoed toward it, one careful step at a time. His nightcap's tassel swayed gently with each move, brushing against his shoulder. When he reached the doorway, he paused for a moment, not because he was scared, but because he loved this part. The moment right before he entered the kitchen at night always felt magical, like stepping into another world. Inside, the refrigerator stood like a silent guardian, humming softly. The stove reflected the moonlight like silver glass. Everything was still. The clock above the sink ticked gently, matching the rhythm of his footsteps. SpongeBob smiled again, that sleepy, content kind of smile that belongs only to those awake when the rest of the world is dreaming. He walked over to the window and looked out. The ocean outside shimmered faintly beneath the moon, and tiny fish drifted by, glowing softly in bioluminescent hues. For a moment he just stood there, breathing it all in the calm, the cool air, the quiet hum of the world. Then he turned back toward the fridge. Its silver handle gleamed softly under the moonlight. With one gentle tug, he opened it. A dim golden light spilled into the room, wrapping everything in warmth. The contrast between the cold blue moonlight and the cozy yellow fridge glow filled the kitchen with a dreamy, painterly beauty, a perfect mix of night and comfort. SpongeBob squinted against the light and peered inside. Rows of neatly stacked ingredients greeted him. Milk bottles, jars of jelly, a bowl of leftover dough, a small tub of butter with a smiling crab sticker on top. He rubbed his hands together. "Let's see," he whispered to himself as if narrating a secret bedtime story. Something simple, something quiet, something delicious. He pulled out the butter first. The soft pat made a pleasant thump as it landed on the counter. Then came a bowl of flour, a little container of sugar, and a few chocolate chips that he kept for special nights like this. Behind him, the clock ticked steady, slow, patient. He set everything neatly on the counter, humming faintly under his breath. It wasn't a song exactly, more like a melody remembered from a dream, the kind of hum that makes the air itself seem drowsy. And then he reached for his apron. It hung from a hook by the window, his crusty crab one, with the little jellyfish embroidered near the bottom. He tied it carefully around his square waist, adjusting it until it sat perfectly straight. The motion itself seemed to calm him further, as if the simple act of preparation was a lullaby. A soft breeze passed through the slightly open window, carrying with it the scent of the ocean. It brushed over the counter, over the butter and sugar, over SpongeBob's face. He closed his eyes and breathed in, feeling a quiet happiness settle in his chest. There was something deeply peaceful about being the only one awake, about knowing that the world outside was sleeping. And yet something gentle and alive was happening here, in this small pool of golden light. The fridge door closed behind him with a soft click. The hum returned, low and steady, blending perfectly with the ticking clock. SpongeBob turned toward the counter, rested his hands on it for a moment, and smiled again. "All right," he whispered to himself, his voice full of sleepy excitement. "Let's make something beautiful." SpongeBob's fingers brushed gently over the counter, feeling the faint coolness of the tiles beneath them. The whole kitchen seemed to hum softly, alive in its silence. It wasn't the busy hum of the crusty crab during a rush, nor the bubbling chaos of a day in jellyfish fields. It was a peaceful hum, like the ocean breathing through his window. He pulled out his favorite mixing bowl, a round sea blue one, with little wave patterns along the rim. It made a soft clink when he set it down. Then he picked up the whisk, turning it in his hand as though it were a precious instrument. For SpongeBob, cooking wasn't just a task, it was a lullaby in motion, a way to fill the night with warmth. He placed a small pan on the counter and quietly hummed to himself as he set out ingredients. The hum was slow, circular, like the kind that loops back on itself until you forget where it began. The sound bounced off the walls, mixing with the ticking of the clock and the faint buzz of moonlit bubbles drifting outside. He started with the flour, a careful scoop, a small cloud of white rising like mist in the moonlight. The particles shimmered briefly before settling down onto the counter, a dusting of starlight in his little midnight world. "Oops," SpongeBob whispered, smiling as the flour left a tiny handprint on his spongy fingers. He brushed them together, laughing quietly at the puff of white that followed. Next came sugar, a handful that glistened like tiny crystals as it fell into the bowl. The soft sound it made, like gentle rain on glass, seemed to echo through the stillness of the room. He added a dollop of butter, watching it melt slightly under the warmth of his hands, then poured in a splash of milk. The scent that followed was soft and comforting, a mixture of sweet cream and ocean air. SpongeBob picked up the whisk, took a deep breath, and began to mix. Swish, swish, swish. The rhythm was gentle, soothing. His hands moved slowly, not rushing anything. Each turn of the whisk was like a heartbeat in the night, steady and calm. The ingredients swirled together into something smooth and creamy, the edges of the bowl catching the moonlight like a ring of silver. He paused for a moment to look around the room. The golden glow from the oven light and the blue shimmer from the window danced together, creating rippling patterns on the walls. Shadows of bubbles floated across the ceiling. The whole kitchen looked like a dream painted in soft watercolor, half asleep, half awake. He smiled to himself. Perfect, he whispered. Then softly, he began to sing. It wasn't a real song, just a sleepy tune, slow and hummed under his breath. The melody rose and fell like waves, and the sound seemed to wrap around the room, filling every corner with calm. His voice was quiet but warm, like someone humming to a seashell. As he sang, he moved gracefully, almost floating between the counter and the stove. He reached for a pan, placed it gently on the stovetop, and turned the knob. A small click followed, then the softest whoosh as the blue flame appeared, glowing like a tiny star beneath the pan. The warm light mixed with the cool moonlight, and the kitchen became a glowing cocoon, a safe little island in the sleeping ocean of Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob poured a spoonful of the batter into the pan, watching it sizzle faintly. The smell that filled the air was sweet and buttery, mingling with the ocean breeze drifting through the open window. It was the kind of scent that makes you feel wrapped in a blanket, the kind that makes time slow down. He hummed louder now, his voice growing a little stronger with every swirl of the whisk. He tapped the pan lightly with a spatula, listening to the soft touch as bubbles formed and popped on the batter's surface. Nice and quiet, he whispered, smiling at the sound. Just the way I like it. He flipped the little cake with a flick of his wrist, graceful and light. It landed perfectly. SpongeBob gave a small, sleepy laugh, proud, but in the kind of way that only matters to you when no one else is watching. Outside, the moonlight shifted as a school of glowing jellyfish floated past the window. Their light-painted moving patterns across the counter, like waves of silver sliding through the air. SpongeBob stopped for a moment, resting his chin on his hand, just to watch them. The sight filled him with that quiet, glowing kind of happiness, the kind that doesn't make you jump or shout, but instead spreads through your chest like warm tea on a cold night. After a few minutes, he turned back to his batter. The first little pancake, or maybe it was more of a cookie, was done. Golden, soft, perfectly round. He placed it on a plate and set it gently on the table, admiring his work. He whispered, "There you go, little one," as if the treat were a living thing. He poured another spoonful of batter, letting it spread softly across the pan. The sizzling sound felt almost musical now. It matched his humming, his heartbeat, and the rhythm of the waves outside. For SpongeBob, this wasn't just about food. It was about the feeling, the slow, careful, loving act of creating something small and warm while the rest of the world slept. Each movement was deliberate, each sound comforting. He moved from the stove to the counter and back again, never hurrying, never breaking the spell of the night. The light flickered softly against his apron, and his nightcap swayed gently as he leaned forward to watch the batter bubble and brown. Gary made a tiny noise from the next room, a sleepy murr. SpongeBob chuckled under his breath. "It's okay, Gare Bear," he whispered. "Go back to sleep. Just making a little midnight magic." He slid another cookie onto the plate. The two golden circles looked cozy side by side, shining faintly in the moonlight. He sprinkled a bit of sugar dust over them, and it caught the light like tiny stars. When he leaned closer to blow the sugar dust away, the crystals swirled into the air, a soft glitter that floated slowly before settling onto the counter. For a moment, he just stood there, letting the silence fill him. The kitchen felt like it was breathing with him, every tick of the clock and every flicker of light moving in sync with his slow, calm rhythm. He looked toward the window again. The jellyfish were gone now, leaving only the deep blue of the sea and the soft glow of the moon. The surface of the water shimmered faintly, and SpongeBob thought it looked like melted butter, smooth and golden beneath a silver glaze. He whispered to himself, "It's so peaceful when everyone's asleep." The words drifted into the air, vanishing like bubbles. He smiled and returned to his stove, flipping another cookie and humming softly. The scent was getting stronger now, buttery, sweet, warm. It filled the house, creeping quietly through the hallway, wrapping the furniture in invisible softness. Even Gary's bubbles seemed to float slower, as if the house itself was getting drowsy. The second cookie joined the first two on the plate. SpongeBob admired them for a moment, then reached for another spoonful of batter, ready to make more, not because he was hungry, but because he wanted the moment to last. The rhythm of the night had changed. It no longer felt like SpongeBob was in his kitchen. It felt like he was floating in a soft little bubble of warmth suspended in time. Each sound seemed to come from far away, the tick-tick of the clock, the faint hiss of the pan, the slow roll of waves outside. They layered together like a lullaby, wrapping around him and the golden little treats resting on the plate. The air was thicker now, with the scent of melted butter and sugar so warm that even the shadows seemed softer. SpongeBob moved slower, like someone half asleep but smiling in a dream. His nightcap drooped over his eye again, and he didn't bother fixing it. He just laughed quietly and gave it a gentle flick. He poured the next bit of batter, watching it spread lazily across the pan. His hand traced small circles with the spatula, more like drawing than cooking. The glow from the stove reflected on his face, small flickers of light that danced over his cheeks and eyes, mirroring the flicker of the blue ocean outside the window. He sighed contentedly. "Midnight cooking. It's the best kind," he whispered to himself. A quiet murp answered from the next room. Gary, half asleep, had sensed the warmth and scent drifting toward him. SpongeBob chuckled softly. "You smell it too, huh, Gare Bear?" he said, smiling toward the hallway. "Don't worry, there'll be plenty." He flipped the cookie again, perfectly golden. As it landed, a puff of steam rose, twisting and curling in the moonlight, like a sleepy spirit. He leaned in and watched it fade, mesmerized by how beautiful something so small could be. When the pan was empty again, he didn't rush to pour more. He just stood there, holding the spatula loosely, staring at the soft glow of the oven light. It flickered like a heartbeat, steady, quiet, soothing. SpongeBob rested his elbows on the counter, chin in hands, eyes half closed. He felt warm all the way through, not just from the stove, but from something gentler, something peaceful. The night had a texture to it, smooth, velvety, endless. Even the air felt sleepy, moving in slow waves through the kitchen. He watched the bubbles in the batter pop one by one, each tiny sound sharp and comforting. Outside, the jellyfish glow had disappeared completely, leaving only the moonlight cool and pale through the water. It cast long, soft shadows across the floor, each shaped like drifting clouds. SpongeBob's eyelids drooped. He hummed a slow, wordless tune, letting his voice blend with the sounds around him. It didn't feel like he was alone. It felt like the night itself was keeping him company. He looked over to the small radio sitting on the windowsill. It was old and slightly cracked, the kind that picked up strange frequencies from the ocean. SpongeBob turned the knob softly. A faint crackle filled the room, followed by a quiet, distant melody, the kind of music that sounds like it's coming from under the sea itself. A sleepy piano played a few soft notes, and then a gentle hum followed, like someone singing from far away. The tune wrapped around the kitchen, melting into SpongeBob's own humming. He swayed slightly, whisking slowly in rhythm with the song. The mixing bowl glimmered like liquid moonlight, and he watched the reflections ripple every time his whisk moved. "Maybe I'll bake something special," he murmured, half to himself, half to the music. "Something even Patrick would dream about." The thought made him giggle softly. Patrick would probably just eat the whole batch raw and fall asleep mid-bite. The image made SpongeBob's grin widen, but even his laughter came out soft, like he didn't want to disturb the quiet spell of the kitchen. He poured another round of batter into the pan. The sizzling was louder this time, crisp and lively for a moment, before settling back into that gentle whispering sound. He tapped his spatula gently on the edge of the pan, tap, creating a little beat for the music playing in the background. The bubbles that rose from the batter looked like tiny pearls. They glowed faintly, catching the moonlight that streamed through the window in small beams. SpongeBob leaned closer, fascinated. He whispered, "You're like tiny dreams, aren't you? Just floating up." And pop. A small puff of flour dust rose from the counter as he laughed. It swirled upward and caught the moonlight, turning into a small white cloud drifting toward the ceiling. For a moment, SpongeBob thought it looked just like one of the clouds in his dreams, soft, floating, harmless. He turned the pancake again, slower this time. The smell deepened, becoming richer, more buttery. His stomach gave another small growl, but it didn't bother him, it just made him smile. The night wasn't about hunger anymore. It was about the calm of being awake while the world rested. He took a moment to glance at the clock. Its hands moved lazily, the ticking blending into the steady hum of the stove. Time felt elastic, stretchy, and soft like the batter itself. He couldn't tell if 5 minutes or 50 had passed, and it didn't matter. He plated another cookie, then another, arranging them neatly in a little circle. "There," he said softly, "the circle of snacks." He giggled at his own joke and gave the plate a proud nod. The golden treats gleamed faintly under the oven light, steam curling from them like tiny clouds. He brushed a bit of powdered sugar on top, and the white dust fell gently like snow. The moment it hit the warm surface, it sparkled and vanished. SpongeBob sighed happily, resting his chin on his hand again. "You know," he said softly to no one in particular, "I think nighttime food tastes better just because it's a secret." He thought about that for a while, how the world felt different at night, quieter, slower, but somehow more magical. There was no rush, no noise, no orders being shouted from the kitchen. Just him, the hum of the stove, and the soft flicker of light across the counter. He let his thoughts wander like bubbles, rising and drifting through the calm. He imagined what Squidward was dreaming about, probably something dramatic, maybe a concert with him as the star. He imagined Patrick snoring under a mountain of blankets, dreaming about ice cream and jellyfish. And he imagined Mr. Krabs asleep in his office, hugging a money bag like a pillow. The images made him smile warmly. "They're all asleep," he whispered, "and I'm here making cookies at midnight. Maybe I'm the dream." The thought made him giggle softly again. He poured one last bit of batter into the pan, not because he was hungry, but because he loved the sound. The sizzling was like ocean foam, rising and fading in waves. He leaned against the counter and looked out the window again. The moon had shifted higher now, glowing brighter. The entire ocean outside shimmered faintly ripples of light, dancing like moving glass. He could see his reflection in the window. Sleepy eyes, a flour-dusted apron, and a nightcap slightly askew. He grinned at his reflection and whispered, "You're doing great, Chef." The reflection grinned back, of course, and that made him laugh quietly. He reached up to wipe a little flour from his cheek, but only smeared it more. Then, as the final cookie finished cooking, the music from the radio began to fade. The soft piano trailed off into a long, low hum, one that seemed to match the sound of the ocean beyond. SpongeBob tilted his head, listening. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of warmth, calm, and the deep contentment of someone doing something they love with no one watching, no one judging, no noise at all. He slid the last cookie onto the plate, turned off the stove with a gentle click, and let the quiet return completely. Only the clock ticked now, steady and slow. The golden glow from the oven began to dim, leaving the kitchen lit only by the pale silver of the moon. SpongeBob sighed, his body heavy but happy. He looked down at his work, a small, perfect plate of cookies, each one glowing softly in the light. He smiled and whispered, "Perfect bedtime snack." SpongeBob carried the plate of cookies to his tiny kitchen table. The chair creaked softly as he sat down, its legs scratching against the floor in the kind of quiet that made even the smallest sound feel like music. He placed the plate in front of him, folding his hands politely as if about to enjoy a feast at a grand restaurant, but then laughed softly at himself. "No need to be fancy," he whispered. "It's just us, huh?" He turned toward the hallway. Gary had appeared at last, blinking slowly, his eyes drooping but curious. The snail's shell gleamed faintly under the moonlight, and he left a faint, glistening trail as he slid closer. SpongeBob smiled warmly. "Couldn't resist the smell, huh, buddy?" Gary let out a quiet murps, curling beside SpongeBob's foot. SpongeBob reached down, scratching the top of his shell gently, then broke off a crumb from a cookie. "Here, just a taste." Gary sniffed it, then took it slow and dainty. He chewed, if one could call it that, with the faintest squish sound, then gave a sleepy blink of approval. SpongeBob grinned. "Yeah, I knew you'd like it." He picked up a cookie of his own, still warm from the pan. The sugar glaze shimmered under the moonlight like a coating of stars on its surface. He took a tiny bite, eyes closing automatically as the buttery sweetness melted over his tongue. It wasn't just good, it was perfect. Soft in the middle, crisp on the edges, with just enough sweetness to make him sigh. He hummed happily, rocking slightly in his chair, worth every sleepy second. He chewed slowly, savoring every bite. The sound of the clock faded behind him, replaced by the soft hum of the ocean currents brushing against his window. The water outside rippled faintly, catching silver light from the moon and sending it flickering across his walls. Each flicker felt like a heartbeat, each reflection a whisper. The kitchen felt alive, not busy or noisy, but warm and breathing, as though it too was dreaming. SpongeBob leaned back in his chair, crumbs scattered across his pajama shirt, one hand holding the cookie, the other resting lazily on the table. He looked at the oven light, now dimmed to a soft orange glow. "This," he murmured, "this is what peace tastes like." Gary answered, with a slow blink, curling up on the floor beside him, his shell half shining, half shadowed. SpongeBob smiled down at him, his voice just above a whisper. "Guess I wasn't the only one with a midnight craving." He looked back at his plate, only 2 cookies left now. He pushed one gently toward the edge for Gary, just in case, then picked up the last one for himself. He took another bite and hummed softly again. His humming turned into a tune, that same sleepy lullaby that had followed him through the night, the one from his dream worlds, from soft mornings and quiet evenings. He didn't know where the melody came from. Maybe it was just in him, a tune the ocean had taught him long ago. As he hummed, his eyelids began to droop. The moonlight on the counter grew softer, almost golden. The air itself seemed thicker, heavier, filled with warmth and sleepiness. SpongeBob leaned his cheek against his hand, still smiling, his voice fading with the last hum. Outside, the waves rolled gently, almost in rhythm. The world was quiet again. After a while, SpongeBob blinked awake, not because of a sound, but because of the faintest shimmer on the window. He turned his head lazily. The first hints of morning light were filtering through the ocean. Not bright yet, just a subtle bloom of color spreading behind the horizon. Pale blue, peach, soft gold. He sat up slowly, blinking the sleep from his eyes. The cookies were gone, crumbs scattered, one half eaten, still resting on the plate. Gary had dozed off completely, his tiny snores blending with the hum of the fridge. SpongeBob chuckled quietly. Guess that's a 5-star review. He stood, stretching gently. His arms reached up toward the ceiling, his fingers wiggling like seaweed in slow motion. His nightcap drooped sideways again, and he let it. The kitchen felt different now. The moonlight was fading, replaced by faint daylight filtering through the ocean. The stove, the counter, the clock, all softly painted in the early colors of dawn. It was no longer a place for cooking. It was a place that had exhaled, done its part, shared its warmth, and now rested again. SpongeBob looked around one last time. He felt something simple and deep gratitude. For the quiet, for the warmth, for the peace that came from doing something kind for himself even when no one was watching. He gathered the crumbs, rinsed the plate, and placed it gently in the drying rack. He wiped the counter with slow, circular motions, not because it needed cleaning, but because it felt right. Every small motion was unhurried, peaceful, deliberate. He yawned softly, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "Time to go back to bed," he whispered. His voice sounded like part of the night itself, soft and fading, yet content. He shuffled back toward his bedroom, the floor cool beneath his square feet. Gary followed sluggishly, half awake, leaving a faint shimmering trail that caught the morning light. When SpongeBob reached his bed, he pulled the blanket back gently, sliding under it with a long, sleepy sigh. The bed was cool, but the warmth of the kitchen still lingered on his hands. He lay on his back, staring at the faint reflection of the dawn through his window. The ocean outside was changing blue, deepening to gold, gold fading to pearl. He smiled dreamily. Tomorrow, maybe midnight waffles. Gary let out a tiny snore from his spot at the foot of the bed. SpongeBob's eyes softened. He reached out and patted Gary's shell. "Good night, buddy," he murmured. Then, realizing the light had already changed, he giggled softly. Good morning." He rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket closer. The scent of cookies still lingered faintly on his pillow, sweet, buttery, like a promise. As his breathing slowed, the sounds of Bikini Bottom began to wake around him. Far away, the faint creak of a door, maybe, Squidward stretching awake. A sleepy seagull's cry. The distant, steady rhythm of waves. But inside SpongeBob's house, everything remained still. The kitchen was quiet again, The radio was off. The clock ticked softly in time with his breathing. The final crumbs on the counter gleamed faintly in the light, tiny pieces of golden sugar catching the dawn before fading into it. And as SpongeBob drifted fully back into sleep, the last traces of the night seemed to dissolve the glow from the stove, the hum of the fridge, the hush of the ocean, blending together into one long, peaceful sigh. The world outside remained dark and still, wrapped in the deep hush of the ocean's midnight hours. Inside the pineapple house, however, a faint golden shimmer began to bloom again, not from the moon this time, but from the tiny spark that danced at the edge of the SpongeBob stove. He struck a match with a slow, deliberate care. The little flame came alive with a whisper, reflecting in his wide, drowsy eyes. He smiled, not his usual wide, gleeful grin, but a smaller one, the kind that carries gratitude instead of excitement. He tilted the match under the burner. Click, whoosh. A circle of yellow light bloomed beneath the pan, its warmth spreading through the cool blue kitchen. Oh, the stove's hum joined the quiet orchestra of the night. The fridge's soft buzz, the distant rhythm of bubbles rising outside, the gentle creak of the kitchen walls breathing in the tide's slow pulse. SpongeBob leaned slightly closer, letting the faint warmth touch his cheeks. His nightcap drooped forward, almost dipping into the pot, and he chuckled under his breath, gently tucking it back. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice just above a whisper. "No rush tonight. Just glow." The stove's flame flickered in agreement, its small tongues of fire reflecting off the metal utensils hanging nearby, turning them into sleepy little stars. SpongeBob opened a cabinet and carefully pulled out a mixing bowl. It gave a soft clink as it touched the counter. Then came the flour tin, the sugar jar, the little wooden spoon that had seen countless breakfasts. He moved with the slow rhythm of someone who wasn't trying to make something perfect, but to feel it. Every motion was deliberate and gentle, every sound soft and round. He poured a small heap of flour into the bowl. A tiny cloud puffed up into the air, white against the dark, and drifted lazily before settling like snow on the counter. SpongeBob giggled quietly, tracing a tiny, smiley face in the flour dust with his finger. "There," he whispered. "A helper." Then he reached for the butter. It was soft already, left out earlier, perhaps by accident, but now perfectly ready. He cut a small square, the knife through it almost musical, and dropped it into the pan. At once the butter began to melt, pooling and swirling in slow motion. Golden rivers ran across the pan's black surface, their edges catching the flicker of the flame like liquid sunlight. The sound, that first tiny sizzle, filled the kitchen with life. It was gentle, comforting, almost like a cat purring. SpongeBob closed his eyes for a second, inhaling the scent, soft, creamy, slightly sweet. He sighed happily. That's the smell of cozy. He dipped his wooden spoon into the butter, stirring it slowly, watching the ripples form and fade. Each swirl caught the light, and for a moment, it looked like the surface of a golden sea under the moon. Gary, still half asleep, peeked around the corner again. His eyes blinked unevenly, one slower than the other. SpongeBob chuckled quietly. "Couldn't resist, huh, little guy?" Gary offered a lazy MRRP, then continued watching from the shadows. The kitchen had become its own little universe, a bubble of warmth floating in the cool dark of night. The stove's glow flickered against the tiled walls, painting faint patterns that wavered like candlelight. The moonlight through the window mixed with it, blue and gold, blending together in soft harmony. SpongeBob set a pot of milk on the back burner and poured in a splash of vanilla. A soft bloop sound echoed as the drop disappeared beneath the surface. Steam began to curl upward, catching the twin lights, the moon's silver, and the stove's gold weaving together into ribbons that danced and disappeared. He watched them drift, his eyes following their slow ascent. "Even steam wants to dream," he said, smiling to himself. He began to hum again, the same lullaby tune from earlier, though slower now, softer, more like a memory than a melody. It filled the kitchen in waves, rising and falling in perfect time with the simmering milk. The whisk joined in, its rhythmic shh matching the beat of his hum. Every sound layered gently, butter sizzling, steam sighing, the faint clink of a spoon against ceramic. Together they became a kind of music, a lullaby made from warmth and stillness. SpongeBob's expression softened as he whisked. His movements were unhurried, his eyes half-lidded. It was as though he wasn't just cooking, he was painting with sound and scent, creating comfort from motion itself. The kitchen glowed brighter now, but still soft, never harsh. Shadows danced lazily across the walls, rippling as the flame flickered and the steam rose. For a moment, SpongeBob looked up at the window. Outside, Bikini Bottom was fast asleep. The coral reefs were still. The jellyfish fields in the distance shimmered faintly, tiny dots of bioluminescence drifting like stars beneath the waves. And all of it, the silence, the stillness, the glowing stove felt perfectly in tune. He poured the warm butter mixture into the bowl with the flour. The sound was quiet but rich, a soft glop, followed by the whisper of the spoon folding it all together. The aroma filled the air, sweet, nutty, golden. It was a scent that carried memories of early mornings and the crusty crab, of laughter echoing through the kitchen, of days when the world felt bright and simple. But this was different. This wasn't work. This was peace. SpongeBob's eyes softened as he stirred. "This is what cooking's really about," he whispered. "Not rush, not orders, not the rush of the grill, just warmth." He paused to watch the batter thicken, little air bubbles forming and popping like tiny thoughts, surfacing and fading. Outside, a faint current rolled by, brushing against the house with a muffled whoosh. The sound seemed to harmonize with everything, the whisk, the sizzle, his heartbeat. SpongeBob smiled again, resting his chin in his hand for a moment. The smell of the mixture, the hum of the stove, the glow of the flame, they were all little reminders of something simple and perfect. He tilted his head slightly, watching how the steam from the pan caught the light. It rose and curled into shapes, soft, cloud-like, almost alive. He laughed quietly, seeing one curl that looked suspiciously like Patrick's face. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You're here too, huh?" The steam swirled away, and SpongeBob's laugh faded into a content sigh. The night wasn't empty. It was full of small sounds, small movements, small joys that made the quiet feel alive. He turned down the flame, letting it shrink to a low, sleepy glow. The warmth now filled the kitchen completely, blending with the faint chill of the ocean air that crept in through the window. SpongeBob leaned forward slightly, his arms resting on the counter, just watching the light dance on the metal of his spoon. There was no need to rush. No one was waiting for an order. No clock to race against. Just him, the glow, and the gentle heartbeat of the stove. SpongeBob took a deep breath and smiled. The kitchen air was different now, warmer, thicker, scented with butter and sweet steam. It reminded him of mornings at the Krusty Krab, but softer, slower, like those memories had been wrapped in velvet and left to drift through the night. He ran a fingertip along the rim of the bowl, scooping up a dab of the batter. He brought it close to his face and sniffed. The aroma was simple, but comforting sweet vanilla, warm butter, and something faintly salty from the ocean air that seeped through the window cracks. He chuckled softly. "A pinch of sea breeze," he whispered, as if it were a secret ingredient. With careful hands, he took a small ladle and poured the first portion of batter into a shallow pan. The sound of it spreading, that soft, sticky shh, filled the silence like a sigh. The edges bubbled gently, golden circles forming where the heat met the cool mixture. He reached for a spatula, the one shaped like a smiling jellyfish. It was his favorite, though he'd never admit it out loud at work. It wasn't just a tool, it was company. "Let's do this right, pal," he said to it with mock seriousness. "Nice and easy. No flips too soon." The spatula, resting patiently on the counter, gleamed faintly in the stove's glow as if nodding back. SpongeBob waited. He could feel the rhythm of the cooking, that natural, quiet tempo that only came when he wasn't trying to be fast. The smell of browning butter filled the room, mixing with the faint saltiness of the sea breeze. He flipped the pancake smooth, perfect, almost floating. It landed with a soft whoop, steam escaping in lazy curls. SpongeBob laughed quietly, clapping his hands once, the sound muffled by his mitts. "Ha! Nailed it! Midnight breakfast, champion!" He placed the finished pancake on a small plate and drizzled it with honey. The golden liquid caught the stove light, glowing like sunlight in miniature. He tilted the plate, watching it shimmer. The honey moved slowly, lazily, like time itself had no need to hurry here. Then he poured another ladle of batter, and another. Each one hissed and bubbled, the sound mixing with his soft humming. Gary had wandered back into the kitchen again, curling up by the warmth of the stove this time. His shell reflected the flickering flame, catching bits of gold in its spiral. SpongeBob looked down and smiled. "Getting comfy, huh? Can't blame you." Gary purred quietly, and SpongeBob continued his cooking, occasionally leaning down to check that his little companion was still cozy. As the stack of pancakes grew, the room's glow deepened the stove and the honey. Even the flour dust on the counter seemed to hold light of their own now. The whole kitchen had turned into something magical, not quite a dream, not quite awake. Each movement, pouring, flipping, stirring, seemed to ripple outward, blending with the calm rhythm of the sea outside. SpongeBob paused for a moment, spatula in hand, watching how the steam from the pan drifted upward. It curled toward the ceiling, soft and translucent, twisting like the ocean's current. He watched it until it faded. And for a brief second he thought he saw shapes inside it, outlines of jellyfish drifting through clouds, the faint shimmer of the pillow kingdom he'd once dreamed about. He blinked slowly. "Huh, funny," he murmured. "Feels like it's all connected somehow." He smiled and returned to his cooking. Maybe dreams never really ended. Maybe they just changed shape from clouds to pancakes, from feathers to steam. The idea made him giggle softly. Pancake clouds. I'd eat those. He poured the last bit of batter into the pan and listened to it sizzle, that beautiful, hypnotic sound. The flame beneath the pan flickered brighter for a moment, then settled into a steady glow, like it understood what it was doing was sacred. SpongeBob leaned his elbows on the counter, resting his chin in his hands as he watched the last pancake finish. His eyelids grew heavy again, the rhythm of cooking blending into a lullaby. When he flipped the final pancake and placed it on top of the stack, he stepped back and admired his work. A perfect tower of golden circles, each one soft and steaming, honey cascading down the sides like liquid morning. "Now that," he whispered, "is peace served warm." He looked around the kitchen, flour dust floating in the air like snow, bowls resting quietly, steam fading into stillness. Everything was in its place, Everything was calm. SpongeBob reached up to turn down the stove. The flame shrank until it was no more than a soft ember glow. Even then, its light seemed to linger in the air, reflecting off the metal knobs, painting the tiles in sleepy amber patterns. He carried the plate of pancakes to the table. Each step was slow, deliberate, as though he were afraid of disturbing the perfect silence he'd created. He placed the plate down carefully and sat across from it, hands folded on the table like he was about to say grace. The clock ticked softly behind him. The hum of the fridge whispered like an ocean lullaby. Gary purred from the corner, half asleep. SpongeBob looked at the pancakes and smiled. That same small, gentle smile from before. "Not bad, Chef," he murmured. "Not bad at all." He took a small forkful, cutting through the warm layers. The honey stretched and dripped, catching light as it fell. He brought it to his mouth and closed his eyes. The taste was perfect, soft, buttery, sweet, and light. But more than the taste, it was the moment, the silence, the warmth, the hum of the night that made it whole. "This," he said quietly, "is what midnight is for." He sat there for a while, eating slowly, each bite timed with the gentle rhythm of his breathing. Every so often, he'd pause just to listen to the stove cooling down, to the faint whisper of the ocean outside, to the quiet ticking that seemed to stretch forever. When he finished, he didn't move right away. He just rested his chin in his hand again, looking at the empty plate. His reflection shone faintly in its golden surface, tired, calm, peaceful. He could almost see the night moving behind him, the stove cooling, the moon lowering, the steam disappearing like fading dreams. The glow of the stove had done its work. It had turned hunger into comfort, stillness into warmth, loneliness into quiet joy. SpongeBob reached out and ran his finger around the edge of the plate, collecting a stray drop of honey. He tasted it, smiled softly, and whispered, "Good night, Glow." The light from the stove flickered one last time before going out completely, leaving only the silver of the moon to guide the rest of the night. But even in the dark, the warmth remained lingering in the air, in the walls, in the slow, sleepy heartbeat of the kitchen itself. SpongeBob stood, stretched, and looked around once more. The calm felt endless. The kitchen didn't need more sound, more movement. It was perfect, suspended in golden quiet. He exhaled a slow, happy sigh. "Tomorrow I'll make waffles." And with that, he turned toward the hallway, ready to drift into the rest of the night. Behind him, the plate glimmered faintly, a single beam of moonlight catching the syrup like a goodbye smile. The kitchen had fallen quiet again. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sleepy crackle of the stove's cooling metal filled the air. SpongeBob leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, soaking in the stillness. The moonlight had shifted slightly, crawling down the wall and pooling across the tiled floor. The color of it changed, too, from silver to a warmer, milkier shade, as if it were growing tired right alongside him. He smiled softly. "Looks like even the moon's ready for bed." For a long moment he didn't move. The air was thick with calm, like syrup that had settled after a long pour. His eyes wandered over the kitchen, the flour-dusted counter, the open jar of honey, the gently tilted stack of clean plates waiting to be put away. It wasn't messy, not really. Just lived in. A little echo of warmth left behind by the act of creation. SpongeBob stood up slowly, his chair legs scraping the floor just enough to sound like a sleepy sigh. He picked up the empty plate, still faintly warm, and carried it to the sink. The faucet squeaked gently as he turned it on, the water streaming out in a quiet silver ribbon. He dipped the plate under the flow, watching the honey dissolve in lazy swirls, gold fading into clear, like liquid dreams washing away. The sponge, his own hand, worked softly, rhythmically. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The act of cleaning was just another kind of cooking, another kind of peace. Each plate, each utensil, each bowl he rinsed, wiped, and stacked with a careful precision. The clinking sounds they made were delicate, almost musical. Gary had moved again, inching closer to the stove where the warmth still lingered in the air. His eyes blinked slowly, content. SpongeBob smiled over his shoulder. "You're a good late-night buddy, Gare Bear." "Meow," came the soft reply. He chuckled. "Yeah, I know. I'll be done soon." As he continued washing, his mind wandered. He thought of the Krusty Krab, how different it looked during the day. Bright, noisy, full of movement, and sizzling grease and laughter. But here, at this hour, everything felt hushed and personal. The stove wasn't just a stove, it was a lantern in the dark. The kitchen wasn't just where food was made, it was where silence became soft enough to hold. SpongeBob turned off the tap and wiped his hands on a towel. The sound of dripping water filled the air briefly before it stopped, leaving the room wrapped in quiet once more. He looked down at the counter, clean now, except for a small trail of flour dust that caught the moonlight like glitter. He leaned forward and blew on it gently. The particles danced, floating upward in a tiny cloud before settling again, like snow on the sea. "Huh, night sparkles," he whispered, watching them fade. He moved to the stove next, running his hand over its surface. It was still warm, but only faintly, a last whisper of the heat that had filled the room. He rested his palm there for a moment, eyes closing. "Thanks, buddy," he murmured to it. "You made tonight feel special." It was silly, maybe, talking to a stove, but in Bikini Bottom, even stoves had personalities. And tonight, this one had glowed just right, not too bright, not too dim, like it understood exactly what SpongeBob needed. He turned toward the window, where the ocean shimmered faintly beyond the glass. The water looked like ink now, dark and endless, but still alive with a soft movement. A single jellyfish floated past, its body glowing gently into the deep blue, a living echo of the stove's golden light. SpongeBob's breath fogged the window as he leaned closer, watching it drift by. "Good night, little guy," he whispered. "You're glowing too." The jellyfish pulsed once, twice, then disappeared into the dark. The kitchen light seemed softer after that. Not gone, just dimmed, like the world had exhaled. SpongeBob turned back and noticed something. His apron, still tied around his waist, faintly dusted with flour and honey. He laughed under his breath. "Guess I made more of a mess of myself than the kitchen." He untied it slowly, folding it into a neat square and setting it on the counter. Then, on impulse, he patted it gently, like tucking into bed. "There you go. Rest up. You earned it." "Hey." The gesture made him giggle, but also filled him with a strange warmth, the kind that comes when everything, no matter how small, feels seen and cared for. He turned off the overhead light, leaving only the moon and the memory of the stove's glow to illuminate the room. The contrast was beautiful soft blue shadows meeting golden edges. The tiles reflected faintly like ripples, the sink gleamed, and Gary's shell glowed faintly in the half-dark. SpongeBob took a deep breath. The air smelled faintly of butter and salt, of steam and sleep. He yawned. "Okay, I think it's time for bed number 2. But before he left, he did one last thing. He opened the little window above the sink. The night breeze drifted in immediately, cool and gentle. It carried with it the faint sound of waves and the creak of jellyfish fields in the distance. The curtain fluttered softly, brushing against his cheek. He rested his elbows on the sill and looked out into the calm sea. The stars shimmered like bubbles trapped in glass. Far below, the coral beds glowed faintly soft pinks, blues, and yellows, blending like underwater candlelight. Everything out there was alive but asleep, dreaming quietly in the rhythm of the tide. SpongeBob smiled to himself. It's like the whole ocean's dreaming together. He stood there for a long moment, breathing it in. The world, the night, the quiet heartbeat of his little home. Everything felt perfectly balanced. When he finally pulled away, the curtain brushed his hand once more, as if waving him good night. He whispered back, "Good night, kitchen." And as he turned toward the hall, he noticed something wonderful. The golden reflection of the stove's light still lingered faintly on the wall. Not bright, not strong, just a warm memory burned into the air. He walked past it slowly, fingertips grazing the light. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll see you again tomorrow." The kitchen, in response, gave a quiet pop, the last cooling sound from the metal pan like a small, sleepy sigh. SpongeBob chuckled. "Sweet dreams." He stepped into the hallway, his slippers padding quietly against the wooden floor. Behind him, the kitchen rested a still glowing memory, floating between wakefulness and dream. And though the stove had gone cold, the warmth it had created lingered inside him, gentle as the last note of a lullaby. He could feel it in his chest, in his hands, in his smile. A soft, steady warmth that said, "You are safe, you are full, you are home." The hallway was dark except for the soft flicker of moonlight spilling through the porthole window. SpongeBob's footsteps made faint squeaks with every step, the sound of spongy soles meeting old wood. He hummed quietly to himself the same tune he'd been humming while he cooked. But now it was slower, gentler, like it was rocking him toward sleep. He passed by framed photos on the wall, one of him and Patrick holding jellyfish nets, another of him at the Krusty Krab, proudly flipping a perfect Krabby Patty. He smiled at them all, each one glowing faintly in the silver light. When he reached his bedroom door, he paused. The house was so quiet that he could hear the faint, rhythmic bubbling from Gary's little shell tank in the corner of the hall. It made a soothing sound like ocean waves slowed down into whispers. SpongeBob opened his door and stepped back into the room where the night had begun. The bed looked even softer than before, the pillow slightly indented, the blanket half folded back, waiting for him. The moonlight painted the whole room in shades of calm, soft blues, pearly whites, and a golden glow that still seemed to cling to him from the stove's light. He sighed happily. Home again. Gary followed him in, trailing slowly across the floor, his eyes blinking drowsily. "Ready to sleep, Gare?" SpongeBob asked softly. "Meow." SpongeBob chuckled. "Yeah, me too." He climbed into bed, fluffing his pillow the same way he had before his late-night adventure. It puffed up lightly beneath his hands, cool and comforting. When he lay down, his body seemed to melt right into it. He could still smell faint traces of what he'd cooked, butter, sugar, and something faintly floral from the honey. It mixed with the salty tang of ocean air drifting through the window. He turned his head toward the open window. The curtain swayed gently, and through it he could see the faint lights of jellyfish drifting in the water outside. They looked like floating lanterns, each one pulsing in rhythm with the tide. It reminded him of the bubbles rising from the pot earlier, the way they'd caught the light. He smiled softly, eyes half closed. "Cooking's just another kind of dreaming," he murmured. "You mix, you stir, and something new appears. The thought made him chuckle sleepily. He rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket up to his chin. It was warm, but not too warm, the perfect kind of cozy. The faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen carried through the walls, now sounding like a lullaby hum instead of a machine. He could picture the kitchen in his mind. The clean counter, the stacked plates, the golden afterglow of the stove still resting in the air. In his imagination, it wasn't dark at all. The stove's warmth lived on like a small, steady candle, still flickering somewhere, waiting for the next night's light. SpongeBob took a slow breath, the kind that fills the chest with calm. He let it out slowly, eyes closing completely. The boundary between waking and dreaming blurred like watercolor in water. Somewhere in that space, he began to drift. His thoughts turned soft and round, memories blending with feelings, sensations becoming images. He imagined the kitchen again, but now it was floating in a sea of starlight. The bubbles from his mixing bowl had turned into stars themselves, rising slowly into the air and popping into tiny lights. Each pop made a faint sound, not sharp but musical, like the soft pluck of a harp string. He floated among them, his body light as foam, his hands trailing through the golden steam. The stove was still there, glowing warmly. It wasn't just a stove anymore, it was a little sun, hovering in the center of the room. Its light spread in ripples, soft and alive, touching every floating plate, every drift of flour. As SpongeBob moved closer, the warmth of it filled him completely. It wasn't hot, it was comforting, like being hugged by the light itself. Gary was there too, floating lazily by on a small bubble. His eyes blinked sleepily, reflecting tiny galaxies. "Meow," he said softly, his voice echoing like a chime underwater. "Hi, buddy," SpongeBob whispered back. They drifted together through slow currents of golden air. Every now and then a bubble would drift past that showed a memory. SpongeBob flipping Krabby Patties at the Krusty Krab, jellyfishing with Patrick, laughing under the sun. Each one popped gently, fading into sparkles. He realized something. All of these moments, the laughter, the quiet, even the lonely midnights, they were all part of the same big, soft world. A world that existed in his heart. A world made of care, warmth, and a touch of imagination. As he floated closer to the stove's golden light, it began to change shape. The handles curled like vines, the glow deepened to amber, and soon it looked like a rising sun peeking over an invisible horizon. He smiled. "Good morning already?" The light pulsed softly, almost like it was answering him. Then, just as his dream self reached out to touch it, the glow faded into white, not gone, just transformed. He felt the weight of his blanket again, soft pillow under his head, the real warmth of his home wrapping around him. The sounds of the sea returned gentle waves outside, the creak of his pineapple house, Gary's faint purring snore beside him. He smiled in his sleep. The dream had ended, but its feeling lingered golden and calm. The camera, if this were a film, would slowly zoom out now, pulling away from the quiet bedroom, through the open window into the soft night of Bikini Bottom. The streets were empty. The ocean shimmered faintly with moonlight. A distant jellyfish pulsed once, then vanished into the dark. And there, through the window, you could still see SpongeBob, a tiny shape under a blue blanket, his nightcap tilted slightly, a peaceful smile frozen on his face. The stove's faint reflection, golden and gentle, danced across his wall one last time, like a memory saying goodbye. The kitchen still glowed faintly from the warmth of the stove. The air was thick with the scent of butter and sugar, soft and golden like the inside of a cookie. SpongeBob stood at the counter, his apron still on, sleeves rolled just a little past his elbows, his eyes bright but half dreamy. He wasn't in a rush. There was no schedule, no Krusty Krab orders, no clattering customers. Just him, the hum of the fridge, and the little tune that had been circling in his head since he woke up hungry. The whisk sat in the mixing bowl, half dipped in a creamy swirl of batter. The bowl gleamed under the soft glow of the stove light, casting a round golden halo across the counter. SpongeBob tapped the whisk once, twice blink, blink, then began to stir again, slowly. Swish, swirl, spin, and fold, he whispered like a recipe spell. Mix the dreams with something gold. He giggled softly. The sound was light, like a bubble popping. As he stirred, a small puff of flour floated up from the bowl and drifted through the air, glowing faintly as it passed through the moonlight streaming in through the window. He paused to watch it, the delicate dance of the flour dust spinning slowly like snow in water. He lifted the whisk and twirled it lazily between his fingers, pretending it was a baton. The kitchen to him was suddenly a tiny concert hall, and the bowl his orchestra pit. With one grand sweep of his hand, he began to conduct an invisible symphony of ingredients. The overture of the oven, he whispered dramatically, closing one eye as though focusing on an audience only he could see. The whisk swooped, spun, dipped into the batter, and rose again. The flour puffed up in little clouds. The bubbles in the bowl rose and popped, each one making the faintest plip sound perfectly in time with the rhythm of his humming. SpongeBob swayed side to side, the movement slow and sleepy, like a dancer half lost in a dream. Outside the window, the jellyfish drifted past again, glowing softly in shades of lavender and gold. They looked like little floating lamps moving through the darkness, part of his midnight concert, their slow pulses keeping time with his whisk. The stove clicked once, then sighed softly, a faint puff of warmth escaping. It felt like applause. Thank you, SpongeBob whispered, giving a tiny bow to no one in particular. He laughed again, the quiet kind that barely shakes your shoulders, but warms your whole chest. Then from somewhere in the stillness, faint, muffled, came the sound of a snore. Hush! SpongeBob froze mid-whisk. His eyes went wide, and then slowly he grinned. Patrick, he whispered. The sound was coming from next door, the unmistakable, gentle, thunderous snoring of his best friend, carrying through the coral walls and into the quiet of the night. It wasn't loud or jarring. It was rhythmic, like waves breaking on a shore. Each snore rose and fell, creating its own sleepy beat that joined his humming perfectly. Ha! SpongeBob chuckled softly. You're part of the song, too. He began to whisk again, matching his strokes to the rhythm of Patrick's snores. Whirra, pause. Whir, hirsch. Hirsch. It was perfect. SpongeBob tilted his head back and hummed a soft tune that followed the snore beat exactly. It was gentle, funny, and cozy, the kind of melody that made even the kitchen walls seem to smile. The bubbles in the bowl began to rise again, forming a pattern almost as if the batter itself was keeping time. Tiny blips of doughy air pushed up through the surface, popping in slow rhythm. He stopped for a moment to watch, eyes wide with sleepy wonder. Even you're joining in. The idea that his ingredients could be enjoying themselves made him laugh again. He swirled the whisk, dipped it into the bowl, and spun around once in a slow, clumsy twirl. His slippers made a small squeak on the floor. As he spun, another puff of flour burst from the bowl, bigger this time, surrounding him in a shimmering white cloud that glittered faintly as it caught the moonlight. He waved his hands through it, and it swirled around him like soft fog. For a second, he looked like a baker's ghost, glowing golden, smiling through flour dust and bubbles. He paused mid-laugh, breathing in deeply. The air smelled faintly sweet, like fresh bread and dreams mixed together. "I should make this more often," he said softly to himself. "Or maybe to the flower, or maybe to the moon. The midnight kitchen special, served with quiet." He dipped his whisk again, slower now. The batter made little swirling ripples that caught the yellow light. The texture was perfect smooth, soft, sleepy. The kind of mix that looked like it wanted to rest just as much as it wanted to rise. He watched it for a moment, mesmerized by the simple movement. Then he began to hum again, this time quieter, like a lullaby for the batter itself. The words came out soft and playful, improvised on the spot. "Stir it slow, let it glow, dreamy dough, rise and flow, sleepy spoon, soft and round, bake a dream without a sound." He smiled faintly when he finished. "That's a good one." The bubbles in the bowl popped gently in agreement. He looked around the kitchen, the stove flickering low, the shadows dancing softly against the walls, the moonlight streaming in like liquid silver. Everything felt alive, but in a slow way, peaceful, balanced. He leaned on the counter with his elbow, resting his chin on one hand, and let out a long, happy sigh. "Sometimes," he murmured, "you don't need noise or daylight to make something wonderful." The clock ticked softly in response. He tilted his head slightly, listening again the snores from Patrick, the hum of the fridge, the faint drip of condensation on the window. It all blended together into a kind of sleepy kitchen symphony. It made him smile wider. "You're right," he whispered to no one in particular. "This is the best concert ever." Then he straightened up again, looked at his bowl, and twirled the whisk one more time like a maestro, finishing his final note. "Encore," he said dramatically. The whisk descended again into the batter swish, swirl, pop, and another gentle puff of flour rose up, curling and drifting toward the ceiling. This time, SpongeBob didn't move. He just watched it the way it shimmered, as it passed through the moonlight, twisting like smoke, breaking apart into smaller bits that floated away. It reminded him of jellyfish again, soft, glowing, alive in their quiet way. And just like the jellyfish, the flower cloud seemed to dance to its own rhythm, slow, patient, calm. SpongeBob rested his whisk on the edge of the bowl and leaned closer to the light. His reflection shimmered faintly in the metal, distorted by the movement of the batter inside. He waved at himself. "Hi, sleepy chef," he said quietly. "You're doing great." And then, without realizing it, he yawned. A long, slow, peaceful yawn, the kind that makes your eyelids heavy and your mind soft. The kitchen air felt warmer now, thicker with comfort. He blinked once, then twice. The glow from the stove seemed to sway slightly, like it was rocking him to sleep. He shook his head gently. "Not yet. Still mixing," he murmured, though his whisk had stopped moving completely. The bowl sat still before him, the surface smooth and shining like pale gold. The last of the bubbles popped silently. And from outside, Patrick's snores continued steady, rhythmic, comforting. SpongeBob smiled softly, eyes half closed. "Good night, Patrick," he whispered. "And good night, kitchen." The kitchen air was thick now with the scent of flour and warmth, soft, golden, sleepy. SpongeBob leaned over the counter, his whisk moving in lazy circles, slow as a lullaby. The batter rippled with each turn, catching faint glimmers of moonlight that fell through the round window above the sink. Every motion felt hypnotic, a rhythm too gentle to disturb the stillness of the hour. He blinked dreamily, his eyelashes heavy, yet his heart light. This was no rush to finish a meal. This was the art of being awake when the world wasn't, of finding a pocket of quiet joy in the in-between hours. The whisk clinked softly against the bowl, echoing like distant raindrops. Swish, whisk, plop, he whispered to himself, making a rhythm out of the sounds. The batter responded with lazy bubbles, bloop, bloop, each one bursting softly like a sigh. He giggled under his breath. Even the batter's sleepy tonight. Steam from the nearby pot curled upward, wrapping around his head like a scarf of mist. It drifted to the window where moonlight caught it and turned it silver. SpongeBob twirled once, not with energy, but with dreamlike grace, holding his whisk like a wand. He pretended he was conducting a quiet orchestra made of kitchen sounds, the low hum of the refrigerator, the soft bubbling of a pan, and the whisper of the night breeze sneaking in through the slightly open window. He raised his hand. Tap. Whisk tap on bowl. The orchestra begins. He stirred once, twice, then paused to let the music breathe. It was a rhythm too small for daytime, too delicate for chatter. It belonged only to him and the silence. Outside, the jellyfish floated past the window, their glow pulsing slowly, in rhythm with SpongeBob's movements. The entire sea seemed to sway with him. Even the tiny bubbles that escaped his whisk drifted upward, twirling in slow motion, as though caught in the spell of the midnight melody. He hummed softly, his voice barely a whisper. Whisk and swirl, soft and slow. Dreams rise up from the dough. A small smile tugged at his mouth. The song wasn't meant to be good, just his. The kind of melody that only exists when no one's listening. The kind that lives between yawns and memories. He turned slightly, catching sight of Gary snoozing in the corner on his favorite towel. The snail's eyes drooped, and his shell reflected the stove's gentle glow like a tiny golden dome. Every now and then, Gary let out a tiny, satisfied meow in his sleep. SpongeBob laughed softly. Guess I'm not the only one having midnight snacks in his dreams. He dipped a spoon into the batter and let it drizzle back into the bowl. The slow ribbon of golden liquid landed with a quiet plop, creating tiny ripples. The sight was mesmerizing. It made him think of waves rolling over sand, each one fading gently into the next. There was peace in this repetition, the way the same motion, again and again, made him feel like time had stopped. The world outside no longer existed. There was no Krusty Krab, no rush, no alarms, no orders yelled over sizzling grills. Just this moonlight, warmth, and the heartbeat of his kitchen. Then came a faint sound snore, squeak, thud. SpongeBob froze, whisk halfway in the air. It was Patrick. Even through the walls, his snores rolled like ocean waves. Every few seconds, there was a muffled mumble, "More ice cream," followed by a loud "Zir" that made a nearby spoon clatter. SpongeBob stifled a giggle, holding his breath as if afraid to wake the whole ocean. Oh, Patrick, always dreaming about food. He turned back to his mixing bowl and began a gentle dance, keeping time with Patrick's snores. Left whisk, right, turn, snore, whisk, snore, spin. The rhythm was so perfect it almost felt rehearsed. Each step made the flour on the floor puff slightly into the air, floating like morning fog. SpongeBob didn't even notice that little specks of flour had dusted his nightcap and cheeks, giving him a sleepy, ghostly look. "Ta-da," he whispered as he finished a slow twirl. He looked down at his bowl proudly. The batter gleamed under the stove light, smooth and glossy, ready to rest. He tapped the whisk against the rim, each click echoing softly like drops on glass. Satisfied, he set the bowl aside, then rested his chin on his hands. You did good, little batter," he murmured. "You're almost a dream come true." For a moment he simply stood there, letting the silence stretch. His eyes wandered across the kitchen. Every corner glowed faintly in shades of gold and blue. The cupboards seemed to breathe, expanding and shrinking with the rhythm of the stove's soft crackle. Outside the window, a school of sleepy fish drifted by, their eyes half closed. It was as if all of Bikini Bottom was wrapped in the same blanket of slumber, and SpongeBob was the only one awake enough to feel it moving. He stretched his arms above his head, the whisk still dangling loosely from his fingers. "I guess even dreams get hungry sometimes," he said to himself. A tiny bubble floated from his bowl, shimmering in the air before popping gently on his nose. He blinked, then laughed a small, quiet laugh that rippled through the still air. It was the kind of laugh that comes from peace, not excitement. A sigh in disguise. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Tick, tock, tick. Each sound felt like a heartbeat in the calm ocean night. He looked up at the moonlight again. It had shifted slightly, gliding over his kitchen floor like a glowing tide. The light now framed him perfectly as he swayed to an invisible tune. His slippers made faint shuffling sounds, brushing against the floor in rhythm. Whisk. Step. Pause. Spin. It was not a dance of energy, but of feeling, the kind that happens when you're too sleepy to think, but too content to stop. As the flour settled and the bubbles faded, SpongeBob leaned his elbows on the counter. His eyes drooped for a moment, and the edges of his world began to blur, stove glow merging with moonlight, sounds blending into a distant hum. The line between waking and dreaming grew thinner. He smiled to himself, eyes half closed. "Maybe cooking's just another kind of dreaming," he whispered. The kitchen had fallen into a hush, so complete that even the bubbles in the batter seemed to sleep. SpongeBob stood perfectly still for a long moment, just watching them rise and pop, each one releasing a faint puff of steam that curled into the moonlight like ghostly sighs. He exhaled softly. The air smelled of sugar and butter, warm, safe, nostalgic. It was the scent of his childhood kitchen, of lazy mornings and soft laughter. But this wasn't morning. This was the secret hour, the time when the sea held its breath and dreams walked around in slippers. SpongeBob picked up the bowl with both hands, moving slowly, carefully, as if carrying a small cloud. The batter shimmered faintly under the kitchen light's soft gold, thick and sleepy. He poured a little into a tray, and it spread lazily, forming gentle circles that almost looked like ripples in a pond. He watched them for a while, mesmerized. "You look cozy already," he murmured to the dough. "Don't worry, I'll keep you warm." Then he set the bowl down and began to move again, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Each gesture was part of the same quiet dance. The whisk tapped, the spoon swirled, and the air itself seemed to keep time with him. Through the window, the moon had drifted higher, washing the kitchen in silver light. It blended with the stove's golden glow, creating a dreamlike haze of blue and honey. SpongeBob's shadow moved softly across the walls, bending and stretching with each motion, like another part of the dance. He swayed his hips slightly as he reached for a tray. "A pinch of magic," he said under his breath, sprinkling a little extra sugar. The grains fell slowly, glinting in the light before disappearing into the mixture. He imagined each one was a star, a tiny piece of the sky finding its way into his recipe. Maybe that's what dreams taste like, he thought aloud, his eyes twinkling. Sweet, but quiet. The oven ticked as it warmed, a low hum filling the silence. SpongeBob leaned against the counter, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth touch his face. It felt like a blanket wrapping around him. His heartbeat slowed, his breathing soft and steady. He could almost fall asleep standing there, but the gentle bubbling from his mixing bowl kept him awake. Bloop, bloop, bloop. It was a sleepy conversation between him and his creation. Still awake, huh? SpongeBob smiled, eyes drooping. Me too. Just a little longer. A faint sound drifted through the window waves, brushing against coral, the far-off whisper of seaweed moving with the tide. The whole ocean seemed to be humming along with him, a lullaby for those who couldn't quite fall asleep. He turned, sliding the tray into the oven with care. The soft click of the door closing sounded final, like tucking someone into bed. "There you go," he whispered. "Dream warm." As he stood up straight again, a small yawn escaped him. He covered his mouth quickly and giggled. "Oops. Guess I'm baking and yawning." He leaned against the counter again, elbows resting on the cool surface, chin in hands. The kitchen clock ticked gently. Tick-tock, tick. With each second, the oven's glow seemed to pulse brighter. The rhythmic ticking mixed with the slow, soothing hum of heat, and SpongeBob began to hum again, this time softer, almost sleep-talking. "Sleepy sugar, golden night, bake your dreams in gentle light. Steam and stars soft and slow. Rise, my friends, rise and glow." His voice drifted across the room like warm air, settling over every spoon, plate, and bowl. For a moment, even the utensils seemed to listen. A bubble popped near his hand, and he chuckled sleepily. "See? They like it?" He closed his eyes for a few seconds, just listening. The kitchen had its own rhythm, the hum of the oven, the faint bubbling, the sigh of the sea outside. It was as if the whole world was swaying in time to an invisible lullaby. He opened his eyes again, slower this time, like lifting a dream's curtain. The light looked softer now, edges hazy, shapes melting into one another. The kitchen almost didn't feel like a kitchen anymore. It felt enchanted. The flour on the counter had begun to shimmer faintly, glowing in the moonlight. Each grain sparkled for a moment before fading. SpongeBob tilted his head, blinking slowly. "Did I add too much sugar? Or just enough magic?" He giggled again, the sound floating like a bubble. He took a few slow steps, slippers whispering against the floor. His reflection shimmered faintly in the oven glass, the same sleepy smile, the same gentle eyes. But something about the reflection looked lighter, almost like it wasn't bound to gravity. SpongeBob leaned closer, nose almost touching the glass. The warmth of the oven made the air ripple slightly, and his reflection seemed to wave back at him. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You still awake in there?" For a moment, he could almost swear he saw the reflection. Smile wider, a soft, dreamy grin. Then a gentle puff of steam fogged the glass, and the image disappeared. The bubbles in the oven glowed faintly as the cookies began to rise. He could see little shapes forming through the haze, soft, round, golden. They pulsed gently with the light, almost breathing. SpongeBob pressed his palms together and whispered, "Good night, little cookies." The hum of the oven seemed to answer back, a low, soothing vibration that ran through the counter and into his hands. He closed his eyes, feeling it. The sound was like the ocean's heartbeat, slow, deep, infinite. He let himself sway again, this time slower, dreamier. It wasn't a dance anymore, it was drifting. His feet barely moved. It was his whole body breathing with the rhythm of the night. The walls of the kitchen blurred softly, light fading into soft streaks of blue and gold. The moonlight, the stove glow, The sound of the sea, they were all blending now, becoming one. He thought about how strange it was to be awake and dreaming at the same time, to be both a cook and a sleeper, a baker and a dreamer. His eyelids fluttered, half-lidded but peaceful. "Almost done," he whispered. "Just a little longer." The air shimmered faintly. Tiny motes of flour floated around him, catching the light like drifting snow. Each one seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. He could smell the cookies now, rich, sweet, buttery, with a hint of salt from the ocean air. The scent wrapped around him like a lullaby. He leaned forward again, eyes soft, and whispered to the oven, "Dream big, my little treats. I'll be right here when you wake." Then he sighed long and quiet, resting his cheek on his hands. His eyes fluttered closed, his breath slow and steady. The camera would pull back. Here the kitchen bathed in gold and blue, SpongeBob lit softly by oven light, surrounded by dancing flour dust and moonbeams. The warm air swelled gently around SpongeBob like a sigh, carrying the scent of sugar, butter, and something almost otherworldly, a sweetness too soft to be real. The oven light glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. SpongeBob's eyes fluttered open just in time to see the faint shimmer of bubbles escaping the oven door, floating upward like soap stars. Each bubble carried a small reflection, flicker of the kitchen, the window, SpongeBob's sleepy smile before they popped, releasing tiny sparks that drifted away like crumbs of light. He blinked slowly. "That's, new." The bubbles kept coming, rising in little trails that weaved lazily through the kitchen. They glowed faintly, the same soft yellow as his stove flame. SpongeBob stood up, eyes wide with gentle wonder. Maybe the cookies are dreaming, too. He reached out, and one of the bubbles landed softly on his palm. It didn't pop. Instead, it shimmered, showing a miniature reflection of his own face. Then, in the tiniest whisper of a voice, the bubble said, "Sweet dreams, SpongeBob." He gasped, not out of fear, but awe, and the bubble burst, dissolving into a faint sparkle that drifted upward and vanished. For a long moment, SpongeBob just stood there, his heart slow, full. He looked around the kitchen, where more bubbles floated lazily through the air. Some bounced softly against the walls, others drifted toward the ceiling, and a few formed a ring around him, glowing quietly, swaying in rhythm. SpongeBob smiled sleepily. "You're all so polite," he whispered. "You even float quietly." He began to move again, his body following the rhythm of the floating bubbles. It wasn't dancing, not in any proper sense. It was more like drifting underwater, letting the tide do the work. He reached out, spun slowly, and let the bubbles circle him like stars orbiting a tiny sun. The sound of the ocean outside seemed to blend with the hum of the oven. The two rhythms joined together, a low, deep pulse that seemed to fill the kitchen with a heartbeat. SpongeBob turned toward the window. The moon was lower now, closer to the horizon, glowing golden white through the rippling waves. He could see his reflection in the glass, moving slowly, hands floating like seaweed in a current. He chuckled softly. "Guess I'm not the only one dancing tonight." The reflection smiled back, but as he blinked, something shifted. The kitchen beyond the window began to fade, replaced by an endless field of clouds, glowing softly from within, pillow-shaped, cotton light, floating endlessly. He blinked again, dazed but calm. His body didn't feel heavy anymore. He could barely tell if he was standing or floating. The bubbles drifted toward the window now, and instead of bouncing off, they passed through it, merging with the dreamlike scene beyond. One by one, they rose into the clouds, vanishing into light. SpongeBob took a slow breath. Oh, so that's where they go. The hum of the oven changed tone, slightly warmer, deeper, like a lullaby played on some distant instrument. He turned back toward it, eyes soft. Inside, the cookies were done. Perfectly golden, perfectly round. But they didn't sit still. They rose just a little from the tray, hovering, surrounded by tiny glows of light. SpongeBob opened the oven door carefully, expecting heat, but what came out wasn't hot air. It was warmth, yes, but not physical warmth. It was something emotional, the feeling of comfort, of safety, of being home. It washed over him in slow waves, like sunlight through honey. He held out his hands, and one of the cookies floated toward him. It was glowing faintly, like a tiny moon. He cradled it with both hands and smiled softly. "You look sleepy," he whispered to it. "Want to rest for a bit?" The cookie pulsed gently in reply, then dimmed slightly, nestling in his palm like a pet curling up. SpongeBob yawned. "Me too." He turned off the stove with a gentle click, the flame flickering out into silence. The golden light faded, leaving only the moonlight and the glow of the cookies. They floated slowly through the kitchen now, circling him like sleep fireflies. He made his way to the small table in the corner where his teacup waited from earlier. He sat down carefully, still holding the glowing cookie. The chair creaked softly under him as though sighing in contentment. He looked around the room one more time. Every surface was dusted in light flour sparkling faintly, the teapot's handle gleaming like a silver crescent, the bubbles fading one by one into mist. "This might be my favorite midnight snack ever," he said, smiling, "even if I don't eat it." He set the cookie on a small plate. Its glow flickered, then steadied like a candle flame about to rest. SpongeBob folded his hands in front of him and whispered softly, "Good night, little one." The air around him shimmered. The bubbles slowed their drifting until they simply hung there, frozen in place, glowing faintly. For a moment, time didn't move. The ticking of the kitchen clock stopped. The hum of the sea outside went silent. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then softly, like the first note of a lullaby, the cookies began to hum. It was barely audible, a delicate tone that vibrated through the air, pure and fragile. SpongeBob's eyelids fluttered as he listened. The sound wasn't just music. It was memory. It carried every quiet night he'd ever lived, every time he'd sat awake while the world slept, finding peace and stillness. He let his head rest on the table, eyes half closed. The hum of the cookies deepened, blending again with the ocean's whisper. The scene began to shift, almost imperceptibly. The kitchen lights dimmed further until the room was lit only by the cookie's glow. The walls rippled faintly as if the entire space was made of soft fabric. SpongeBob didn't notice, or maybe he did, but didn't care. His breathing slowed, deep and even. In his half-dreaming state, he saw the bubbles turning into feathers, drifting upward in slow spirals. The counter stretched into the horizon, becoming a field of light, the stove transforming into a small golden sun. He was no longer in his kitchen. He was floating again, this time not on water, but on a current of warmth and light. The cookies circled him, each one glowing like a tiny planet. Their hum became a melody now, wordless but full of love. SpongeBob smiled, eyes closed, arms drifting at his sides. He was weightless. The camera would slowly pull back SpongeBob, floating in an endless kitchen dream, surrounded by orbiting cookies, glowing flour dust, and faint golden steam. The moon hung above, larger than life, its reflection stretching across the scene like a soft path of silver. The oven hummed quietly, a low, glowing sound that filled the entire kitchen, like a heartbeat made of warmth. It wasn't loud, or busy, or urgent. It was steady. It was calm. It was the kind of sound you could fall asleep to without meaning to. SpongeBob sat at the little table by the window, his head propped in his hand. The moonlight poured across the counter, mixing with the golden flicker of the oven light. Together they painted the room in sleepy colors, honey and blue, dream and reality. The cookies inside the oven rose slowly, their edges turning the color of sunrise. The window glass fogged softly from the warmth, little trails of steam drawing lazy shapes that melted and reformed hearts, bubbles, clouds. SpongeBob's eyes followed them, half-focused, half-lost. He murmured, smiling faintly. That one looks like a jellyfish. And that one, he squinted through the soft haze. That one looks like Patrick's head. If Patrick's head was made of bread. He chuckled to himself, the sound soft and airy, almost blending with the hum of the oven. The warmth wrapped around him, gentle and complete, like being tucked under a big quilt. The whisk on the counter gave a tiny clink as it shifted slightly, sliding a few millimeters closer to the edge. SpongeBob looked at it, amused. "Easy there," he whispered to it, his tone like a lullaby. "You've worked enough tonight. Just rest, okay?" The whisk didn't answer, of course, but somehow the silence that followed felt like agreement. He turned his gaze back to the oven. The glow inside flickered rhythmically, like a candle in a steady breeze. It wasn't just light. It was alive, a pulsing, breathing warmth that filled the kitchen with a quiet pulse of comfort. Tick, tick, the wall clock joined in, marking each second like a slow heartbeat. SpongeBob's eyelids drooped lower. The gentle rhythm oven, clock, distant ocean formed a soft trio, a sleepy orchestra of the sea's midnight hour. He let out a slow sigh, one that drifted across the room like a feather. "It's funny," he whispered, "how even baking feels like dreaming when it's this late." He leaned back slightly in his chair, staring at the faint reflection of the oven light on the kitchen tiles. They shimmered softly, a mosaic of golden ripples that looked almost like sunlight on water. The faint smell of vanilla filled the air now, sweet and buttery. It mingled with the salt from the sea breeze slipping in through the small window crack. Every breath tasted like peace. He closed his eyes for just a second or maybe longer and imagined the world outside. Bikini Bottom asleep, lights out in every home. Patrick snoring softly under his rock. Squidward muttering in his dreams about clarinets and curtain colors. Mr. Krabs hugging his pillow shaped like a dollar sign. And here he was awake, but not really. Drifting between worlds, humming with the oven, feeling the gentle heat and the quiet company of his own thoughts. It wasn't lonely. It was gentle. The kind of alone that feels like being held by silence. He opened his eyes again and stared into the oven window. The cookies had risen perfectly now, golden and round, soft like little suns. The light from within painted SpongeBob's face with a calm glow, his half-lidded mouth in a faint, sleepy smile. "They're almost ready," he said softly, his voice no louder than the ticking of the clock. He tilted his head. "You know, you don't really need a timer when your heart's keeping time for you." He giggled quietly, the kind of laugh that fades as soon as it forms. The oven made a tiny whoosh as it released another wave of warm air. It brushed against his face, carrying the scent of melted butter and sugar. SpongeBob breathed it in and sighed again, heavier this time. His humming began again, soft, aimless, half a song. It wasn't something he knew. It was something he felt. "The night is warm," The sea is slow. Cookies rise and dreams still glow. Bubbles sleep and tides drift low. Bake me peace before I go. He didn't know why the words came out that way, but they felt right. They floated in the air for a few seconds, then seemed to melt into the oven's hum. The light flickered in rhythm with his humming, brighter on each note, dimmer between. "Are you singing with me?" he whispered to the oven, smiling faintly. "Last night, we make a good team." The oven clicked softly, as though in response. SpongeBob let his head rest on his folded arms now, his cheek pressing into the smooth, cool surface of the table. He could feel the faint vibration of the oven through the counter, a steady warmth that thrummed like a heartbeat. He imagined it wasn't a machine at all, but a sleeping creature, slow and kind, dreaming in gold and sugar. His breathing matched the rhythm of its hum. Slow inhale, soft exhale. Somewhere in the back of his mind, thoughts floated lazily, half-formed, drifting like bubbles. He thought about the Krusty Krab quiet and dark at this hour, the fryers cold, the smell of salt still hanging in the air. He wondered if even the spatulas dreamed. He thought about jellyfishing mornings, about the first light that touched the waves. He thought about his friends, Patrick's sleepy grin, Squidward's sighs, Sandy's laughter. Each memory passed through his mind like a small glowing boat drifting through fog. And through it all, the hum continued. Tick, hum, tick, hum. It was music without melody, rhythm without reason. He closed his eyes again. The kitchen began to shift in his imagination. Walls softening, lines blurring, the oven light spreading like sunrise. The air shimmered faintly, and he could almost see it golden ripples, rising and falling in slow motion. His body felt lighter, not tired, not heavy, just floaty, like flour caught in a soft breeze. A feather drifted down from somewhere he didn't know where from. Maybe from his pillow, maybe from the dream he'd left behind earlier in the night. It landed gently on the table beside him. He stared at it, blinking slowly. It glowed faintly in the oven light. "Looks like the Pillow Kingdom sent a visitor," he whispered. He smiled, eyes half-lidded again. "Guess I'm still dreaming. Just a little." The feather quivered slightly, as if nodding in agreement, then went still. The clock ticked on. The cookies turned golden brown. The hum of the oven deepened, low and soothing. And SpongeBob, the world's sleepiest short-order cook, leaned his head on his arm and drifted a little further into his soft, glowing half-sleep, the kitchen breathing gently around him like the ocean itself. The camera would slowly pan out, showing the quiet kitchen, bathed in a soft amber haze, bubbles of steam drifting like clouds, SpongeBob resting peacefully beside the golden glow of the oven. Every small sound, the tick of the clock, the hum of the oven, the faint creak of the chair under SpongeBob's elbow blended together until they no longer felt separate. They became one slow, rhythmic lullaby. The air shimmered faintly with warmth, each ripple of heat from the oven carrying a sleepy golden haze that rolled across the floor like fog. The edges of the cabinets softened. The shadows lost their corners. Even the spoon resting in the mixing bowl glowed faintly, as though it, too, was dreaming. SpongeBob's eyelids fluttered open, not because he'd woken up, but because the dream itself wanted to show him something. He wasn't quite sure if his eyes were open or closed anymore. Everything looked hazy, soft, half-submerged in light. The kitchen light was gone now. Only the oven's glow and the silver moonlight through the small window remained. They mingled in gentle waves, gold meeting blue, like dawn and dusk dancing together without ever deciding who should stay. He rubbed his eyes lazily. Did I fall asleep? He murmured, but his voice didn't echo. It floated, weightless, like it was part of the air itself. Somewhere inside the oven, something flickered, not the cookies, but something else. The glow pulsed faintly, like a lantern swaying under the sea. SpongeBob tilted his head. He leaned closer, his round face framed by the soft reflection of golden light. Inside the oven's little window, the cookies had risen perfectly round, golden, their edges shimmering faintly with something more than sugar. It almost looked like sunlight was trapped in them. He blinked slowly. "You're glowing?" The cookies pulsed softly in reply, the way bubbles shimmer when they rise toward the surface. It wasn't strange to him, not really. After all, dreams had a way of sneaking into his nights, blending with the ordinary like cream into warm tea. He smiled, a lazy, drowsy smile. "Well, that's okay. You can glow if you want to. Just don't wake anyone up." He leaned his cheek back on his folded arms. The oven's golden reflection painted his spongy face in honey tones, the warmth touching his skin like a blanket of light. Tick, hum, tick, hum. The sound became slower, deeper. The kitchen seemed to exhale, the air thick with calm. Outside the window, the ocean currents slowed too. Jellyfish drifted past lazily, their bodies glowing with soft blue pulses that mirrored the oven's rhythm. The whole sea seemed to be breathing, with SpongeBob in and out, slow and steady. He could see them through the glass like moving stars. "Hey there," he whispered, his words barely a sound. "Late night swim?" A small jellyfish paused, hovering at the window as though listening. It blinked once, a faint flash, then drifted closer, resting its soft bell against the glass. SpongeBob giggled quietly. "Careful, that's hot. The cookies are sleeping." The jellyfish shimmered once more, then floated back into the slow current, leaving a faint trail of bubbles that glowed in its wake. SpongeBob watched them until they disappeared into the deep blue beyond, his eyes half-lidded. His breath matched the ocean's flow. He felt endless. As if the oven's hum, the jellyfish's glow, and the steady pulse of his own heartbeat had become one thing, a single, quiet note played across all of Bikini Bottom. His thoughts wandered softly, like gentle footsteps in a fog. He thought of the first time he ever baked something. How the smell filled the Krusty Krab, and Mr. Krabs had rushed out, thinking someone had left the fryers on. He thought of the time Patrick helped, and they'd accidentally made something closer to coral than cookies. He thought of the Pillow Kingdom again, soft clouds, floating beds, that endless sea of feathers that felt like it would never end. Everything connected in his sleepy head, the kitchen, the dreams, the ocean, the oven's hum. All warmth was one warmth. All quiet was one quiet. He let out a soft hum again, eyes still closed, head still resting on his arm. "The oven's singing tonight," he murmured. "It sounds like the sea." And it did. The hum deepened, taking on a low melodic note, not mechanical, not metallic, but soft, like a seashell pressed to your ear. Inside the oven, the light rippled faintly, forming tiny shapes. SpongeBob thought he saw bubbles dancing, or maybe musical notes. They twirled slowly above the cookies, leaving faint trails of light that looked like tiny stars caught in syrup. He blinked slowly, dream-heavy. "You're beautiful," he said softly, barely moving his lips. "I didn't know cookies could dream, too." He could almost hear them reply, a soft whisper carried in warmth. "We're dreaming of you." He smiled again, content. He felt the air shift, not a breeze, but something gentle and invisible, like when you open the oven door just a little. A faint wave of warmth touched his cheek, brushing against him like a sleepy hand. He lifted his face slightly, eyes half open. "You're keeping me company, huh?" The kitchen lights twinkled faintly reflections of bubbles outside, as if nodding yes. SpongeBob let out a small yawn, the kind that makes your whole body soften. "I think I could fall asleep right here." He shifted slightly in his chair, pulling his nightcap down lower. The tassel drooped over his eyes. The hum continued. And slowly, something began to change in the rhythm. Tick, hum, tick, hum. Then hum, hum, hum. It was like a heartbeat changing tempo, a rhythm sliding closer to the rhythm of the sea itself. SpongeBob felt it, his body swaying slightly, matching it unconsciously. The oven's golden light seemed to expand now, pushing softly against the walls, reaching toward the ceiling. It was as though dawn itself had come early, but only for this room. The clock's ticking grew faint, the shadows gentler. Everything pulsed with the same steady glow. SpongeBob's voice came out low, almost sleepy. "Feels like the ocean's inside here now." And in a way, it was. The light shimmered like water, the reflections bending and rippling across the tiles. The oven door reflected faint waves, and the bubbles outside merged with the reflections within, inside and outside, dream and waking, blending together. SpongeBob's hand twitched faintly, as if reaching towards something invisible. He wasn't sure if he was awake anymore, but he didn't mind. He liked this place, this soft in-between, where cookies sang and ovens breathed. He smiled again, a sleepy curve of warmth. "Good night, little cookies." The hum of the oven became something more. Not a sound anymore, a feeling. It filled the space like a slow heartbeat, rising and falling, deep and steady. SpongeBob's breathing matched it without realizing. Inhale with the hum. Exhale with the silence. The rhythm was perfect, too perfect for an ordinary night. The kitchen had gone quiet, except for the oven's song. But it was not an empty kind of silence. It was full, like soft blankets filling every corner. The air was thick with the smell of sugar and butter, glowing warmth, and something impossible to name, something like peace. SpongeBob's eyes were half open, the golden light reflecting in them. He smiled faintly. "You're really singing now, huh?" The oven pulsed again, almost like it nodded. The glow grew stronger, and as SpongeBob blinked, the shapes around him began to change. The counter rippled like water. The spoon in the bowl stretched into a silver ribbon that swayed gently in the air. Steam rose and danced, forming tiny glowing bubbles that floated toward the ceiling, drifting like tiny lanterns. And the oven no longer looked like an oven. Its door became a window, not of glass, but of shimmering golden water. Through it, SpongeBob could see something vast and deep, a sea made of light, swirling slowly as if it were alive. And in that sea, dozens of small glowing circles floated upward, cookies, yes, but they no longer looked baked. They looked like miniature suns rising in slow motion. He blinked dreamily, his mind still somewhere between sleep and wonder. "I must have dozed off. Maybe I'm still cooking," he murmured softly, smiling. He didn't question it. He never did. Not when things became beautiful. The warmth from the oven began to reach out invisible threads of heat, curling around him like a soft embrace. The air shimmered with it. SpongeBob yawned, stretching slightly, his arms moving through air that now felt thick like warm water. He could feel the warmth brushing against him, pulling him gently toward the oven's golden light. His nightcap's tassel swayed like a tiny pendulum, keeping time with the glow. He stood up slowly, his feet making no sound as they touched the kitchen floor, or maybe it wasn't the floor anymore. The tiles felt soft underfoot, like sponge or cloud. He took a small step forward, then another. Each movement sent ripples of gold spreading outward like stepping in shallow sunlight. The air itself began to hum in harmony, low, velvety tones that vibrated in his chest. The oven's door opened silently on its own, releasing a burst of glowing warmth that rolled through the room like the tide. It didn't burn. It didn't sting. It was the perfect temperature, the warmth of a memory you never want to forget. SpongeBob didn't flinch. He smiled softly, whispering, "Guess it's time to check the cookies." He leaned closer, his reflection rippling across the golden surface. But when he looked, it wasn't himself staring back. It was something brighter, something rounder. It was SpongeBob, but lighter, glowing faintly from within, like his whole body was made of light and kindness. The dream version of himself smiled too, mirroring the sleepy grin on his real face. "Hi there," SpongeBob said quietly. His reflection waved slowly. A little bubble escaped the oven and floated toward him, glowing like a firefly. He cupped it in his hands. It felt warm and alive, humming faintly with a note that made his eyelids droop again. The bubble popped softly, releasing the scent of cookies and sea salt. SpongeBob laughed gently. "You smell like bedtime." Another bubble rose, then another, hundreds of them now, drifting from the oven, like stars escaping into the night. They swirled around him, illuminating his kitchen in gold and cream and faint coral hues. He turned slowly, eyes half closed, his whole body swaying to the rhythm of their floating. It wasn't dancing, it wasn't moving, it was just being. His thoughts dissolved like sugar in warm tea. "Maybe this is what dreams smell like," he whispered to himself. "Fresh cookies and the sea." The oven's hum deepened again, softer now, slower, like a mother's lullaby fading as her child drifts off. He could almost hear words in it, faint, far away, like a melody sung underwater. "Rest, little sponge. The night is kind." He exhaled, smiling. "I know." He turned to glance out the window. The moon was lower now, half hidden behind the coral hills. But even the moonlight looked different, warmer, almost golden, as though the oven's glow had reached beyond the walls, tinting the whole ocean with a sleepy amber tone. Jellyfish drifted by again, glowing softly like tiny lanterns carried by invisible hands. They floated past the window, leaving faint trails of light that curved gently like waves of breath. And when SpongeBob looked closely, he realized they weren't just drifting by, they were circling slowly, almost as if they were dancing to the same song as the oven. "The ocean's listening," SpongeBob whispered, resting a hand on the counter. "It can hear the lullaby, too." The kitchen shimmered again, the boundary between inside and outside melting completely. The window dissolved into open sea. The counters became coral edges, the walls gentle ripples of light. The oven's glow spread wider and wider until it filled everything, the cupboards, the floor, even SpongeBob himself. He wasn't afraid. He didn't even feel surprised. He simply felt safe. He walked forward again, now weightless, the warmth supporting him like a current. The golden bubbles rose all around him, hundreds, maybe thousands, and as they passed, he could see small memories flickering inside them. SpongeBob and Patrick building sandcastles, SpongeBob feeding Gary, SpongeBob laughing with Squidward, even if Squidward didn't laugh back. Each memory shimmered softly before floating upward, bursting in tiny glows of light that sank gently into the ocean sky. SpongeBob watched, his smile calm and faint. "Guess I've had a good day," he whispered. And the oven, or maybe the ocean, or maybe the dream itself answered back with one long, low hum that sounded like agreement. He reached out his hand, touching one last glowing bubble as it floated by. It popped gently against his fingertip, releasing a faint sparkle that drifted upward, turning into a tiny, cookie-shaped star. SpongeBob chuckled quietly. "You really did your best tonight, huh?" The hum softened. The warmth curled around him like a blanket. His voice dropped to a murmur. "You can rest now, too." And slowly the light began to dim, not fading away, just settling down, like someone gently closing their eyes. The oven's door shut quietly. The bubbles disappeared one by one. The jellyfish drifted out of sight, so still that it didn't even feel like a place anymore, more like a feeling that had chosen to take shape for a while. The air hung in soft gold. The clock's hands barely moved, ticking in slow, patient rhythm. SpongeBob's head rested on his folded arms, eyes half closed, breathing soft and deep. He wasn't quite asleep, but he wasn't awake either. He floated in that perfect middle, where everything feels weightless and kind. The oven gave one last gentle hum, softer than a whisper. Inside, the cookies were done. Steam curled from the vent, slow and sleepy, like the last sigh of a dream before morning. It smelled like warmth itself, butter, sugar, vanilla, and something deeper, the scent of home. SpongeBob lifted his head slowly. His nightcap slipped to the side, its tassel brushing the counter. He murmured, blinking in the golden light. "You finished singing?" The oven didn't reply, but the glow inside shifted faintly as if nodding. SpongeBob smiled, slow and soft. "You did great." He opened the oven door carefully, and a wave of gentle heat rolled over him. Not too hot, just warm enough to make his eyelids flutter again. He leaned in slightly, breathing it in. Inside, the cookies sat perfectly on the tray, round, golden, slightly cracked on top. They glowed faintly in the dim kitchen, not from magic now, but from the kind of perfection that only happens when something is made with peace. SpongeBob picked one up. The edges were crisp, but the middle was soft. He could feel it, even through his mitts. He set the tray on the counter, then leaned down to take a slow, careful sniff. "Smells like bedtime," he whispered, chuckling quietly. The air shimmered faintly, like even the walls agreed. He broke one cookie in half. It cracked gently, a quiet little sound that echoed like the pop of a bubble. Steam curled from the center, dancing briefly before vanishing. SpongeBob took a small bite, his eyes closing as soon as it touched his tongue. The flavor wasn't grand or loud. It was simple, buttery, and just sweet enough. But behind it was something more, the warmth of the room, the hum of the oven, the calm of the night. It tasted like stillness, like the world finally resting. He leaned against the counter, slowly chewing, watching the faint glow of the oven fade into its normal shade. The dream was ending now, gently, respectfully. "Glantitutta." A bubble drifted up from his mixing bowl, one last remnant of that dreamlike magic, and floated toward the ceiling before popping in a tiny shimmer of gold. SpongeBob smiled sleepily. "Good night," he whispered to it. Then he looked toward the window. Outside, the first traces of dawn were touching the water. The sea had turned from deep blue to soft lavender. The moon had become a pale blur, sinking behind coral towers, while the first rays of light glided down through the ocean like threads of silk. Jellyfish still drifted lazily in the distance, slower now, quieter, as if they too were finally tired. The entire ocean was sighing itself awake. SpongeBob tilted his head, resting his cheek on one hand. "Guess the night's over," he said softly, though his voice had no disappointment in it, just calm acceptance, the kind that comes when you know you've lived every moment gently. He took another small bite of cookie, savoring the warmth. Behind him, the oven ticked as it cooled, each soft pop echoing in the still kitchen like the faint notes of a fading lullaby. He glanced up at the clock. The hands hadn't moved much. It was still early, that fragile time between night and morning, when the world hesitates before waking. "Oh, I'll clean up later," SpongeBob mumbled, eyelids heavy again. He carried the tray of cookies to the table, each step silent on the floor. Then he sat down slowly, placing his chin in his hands, staring at the steam curling from the tray. A few crumbs sparkled faintly in the golden light, like tiny stars that had landed just for him. He smiled. The oven's hum was gone now, replaced by the distant, steady hush of the ocean waves brushing gently against coral like a slow heartbeat returning to rhythm. He could hear Gary faintly in the next room, letting out a soft, sleepy murr, then falling silent again. SpongeBob looked toward the doorway, his voice barely above a whisper. "Go back to sleep, buddy, and everything's okay." He rested his head on the table beside the cookies. His eyes closed slowly. The warmth from the tray rose around him like a tiny cloud, filling the space between his breaths. His face softened into the smallest smile, peaceful, content. The golden light from the oven reflected in his eyelashes, then dimmed, leaving behind only the pale blue glow of morning. The kitchen seemed to lean closer, holding its breath, not wanting to disturb him. The bubbles in the sink had stopped moving. The whisk had settled. Even the fridge had gone quiet, as if the whole house knew it was time for silence. SpongeBob's fingers twitched once, maybe, reaching for another cookie in his dream. He murmured something too soft to catch, then went still again, his chest rising and falling in perfect, sleepy rhythm. The world outside grew brighter. The soft lavender turned gold. The light filtered through the water and into the kitchen, wrapping everything in a gentle shimmer. And for a moment, a small, perfect moment, the kitchen looked almost like the dream again. The counters glowed faintly, the air seemed to hum, and the cookies sparkled with the same faint warmth as before. Then the light shifted. The kitchen glowed like a lantern under the sea. Soft golden light from the oven mingled with the cool blue of the moonlight seeping through the round window. It was the kind of quiet that felt alive, not empty, but full of warmth and whispers of rest. SpongeBob sat on his stool, elbows on the counter, a half-finished tray of cookies before him. The air was heavy with the scent of butter and sugar, that dreamy smell that wraps around your thoughts until you can't tell if you're awake or half asleep. He lifted one cookie from the tray. It was still warm, a little soft in the middle. Steam curled up like ghostly ribbons, dancing toward the ceiling before dissolving into the stillness. SpongeBob turned the cookie slowly between his fingers, smiling faintly. "You've cooled just right," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. He took a bite, and for a moment time stopped. The sound was soft, a delicate crunch, like snow underfoot, or a page being turned in a book you love. The taste bloomed slowly, a gentle sweetness, a hint of salt, and something that couldn't be named, something that felt like memory. SpongeBob let out a sigh that sounded almost like laughter. That's it," he murmured, leaning back a little. "That's the taste of quiet." The world outside shimmered faintly. Through the window, the sea stretched out in layers of blue and violet, touched by the dim light of the moon above. Jellyfish floated by like sleepy lanterns, their tendrils waving slow as drifting ribbons. The bubbles from earlier had faded. Even the tiny hum of the oven was gone now. All that remained was the ticking of the clock, steady and slow like a heartbeat. SpongeBob sat perfectly still, eyes half-lidded. He chewed thoughtfully, slowly, as though each bite needed its own little space of silence. When he swallowed, the cookie's warmth seemed to linger, not just in his mouth, but in the room itself. The golden light deepened, soft shadows moving gently along the walls. He took another bite, smaller this time, watching how the crumbs fell onto the counter. They sparkled faintly in the dim light, just little dots of sugar and sea dust, glowing as they landed. He brushed one finger across them, collecting the crumbs. They felt warm. He smiled again, softer this time. "Moonlight crumbs," he whispered. "Little bits of night you can eat." Behind him, a faint sound stirred a slow, lazy meow, followed by the soft scrape of a shell against the floor. Gary had woken up. He appeared in the doorway, blinking his big eyes sleepily. His shell shimmered faintly under the golden light, streaks of pale blue reflecting from the window. SpongeBob turned, smiling. "Hey, Gary," he said softly. "Couldn't sleep?" Gary blinked once. "Merle?" SpongeBob chuckled quietly. "Yeah, me neither." He broke a cookie in half and held out one piece. "You want a midnight snack too?" Gary slid forward slowly, his eyes drooping but curious. He sniffed the cookie fragment, then gave a soft, approving purr. SpongeBob set it down on a little saucer, pushing it gently toward him. "Careful, it's still a bit warm." Gary took a slow, tiny lick. Then another. His eyes lit up faintly and a happy bubble popped beside him. SpongeBob giggled, resting his chin on one hand. "Yeah, I know, it's good, huh? Like the moon made it herself." Gary made a quiet meow, his way of agreeing. For a while they sat like that SpongeBob at the counter, Gary on the floor beside him, the two of them sharing the last of the night in calm silence. Each time SpongeBob took a bite, Gary followed with a small lick of his piece. The rhythm of their chewing and sipping filled the kitchen like a slow lullaby, the simplest kind of music. Outside, the moon drifted higher, turning the sea a shade lighter. The corals glowed faintly, and little bubbles floated upward, glowing like stars under water. SpongeBob leaned back on the stool, eyes soft. "You ever think about how quiet nights taste different, Gary?" Gary blinked once, then twice, the snail version of a shrug. SpongeBob laughed gently, the sound breaking like a tiny wave. "They do," he said. "They taste slower." He held up another cookie, looking at it as if it were something ancient and precious. "Like time just stops for a minute so you can really feel it." Gary purred, curling up near his bowl, satisfied. SpongeBob nibbled the edge of the cookie, humming softly a tiny, tuneless hum that melted perfectly into the sound of the sea outside. The clock ticked. The ocean sighed. A bubble rose from the sink, drifted lazily toward the ceiling, and popped with a little shimmer of gold. Everything was slow. Everything was gentle. SpongeBob's gaze drifted toward the window again. The ocean outside looked like melted sapphire, dark and gleaming. Somewhere in the distance, a jellyfish pulsed softly, its glow fading and brightening like a heartbeat. He smiled. "Even they're sleepy," he whispered. He took another small bite, not because he was hungry, but because he wanted the feeling to last just a little longer. The cookie was cooler now, but still soft in the center. The flavor had settled calm and round, like the night itself had soaked into it. He brushed a few crumbs from his hands, watching them drift down like golden dust. Gary made a quiet noise, something between a sigh and a purr. His eyes drooped lower and lower until they finally closed. SpongeBob looked down at him with a fond smile. "You're full, huh?" "Yeah, me too," SpongeBob said, his voice slow and drowsy. "Full of cookies and moonlight." He leaned back slightly, letting the stool tilt just enough that it creaked. His eyelids fluttered as he stared out the window, watching the light ripple across the glass. The water outside shimmered faintly, little streaks of silver sliding past. For a moment, it almost looked like the stars above were drifting down to visit. The kitchen was no longer just a room. It felt like part of the sea, glowing with the same calm rhythm. SpongeBob's breathing slowed. His hand rested on the counter next to the tray of cookies. The steam had faded now, leaving behind only the soft scent of sweetness. He glanced at the clock, though he didn't really read it. The ticking felt more like a lullaby now, a soft, rhythmic reminder that the world was still turning, even if he didn't need to move with it. He yawned, a quiet, contented sound. "Maybe just one more cookie," he said softly, his words slurred by sleepiness. He reached for another, but his hand paused halfway. He smiled, then let it fall back to the counter. The cookie tray had cooled completely now. A faint ring of steam still clung to the oven's glass, like the last breath of a fading song. The hum of the refrigerator blended with the soft ticking of the clock, two sleepy instruments playing a duet in the silence. SpongeBob rubbed his eyes slowly, blinking at the kitchen that shimmered faintly around him. The golden light had dimmed to a warm amber, soft and fuzzy, as though wrapped in a thin blanket of dream. He leaned forward, resting his cheek on the counter. The cool surface pressed gently against his face, grounding him in a moment that didn't feel quite real or unreal, just peaceful. Gary had already curled into a little spiral near the saucer, his shell glinting faintly under the leftover glow. Each time he exhaled, a tiny bubble drifted upward, slow and steady, popping near the ceiling. SpongeBob watched one rise, eyes half closed. "You make sleep look so easy, buddy," he whispered with a lazy smile. He turned his gaze toward the window. Outside, the ocean was layered in soft shades of indigo and turquoise, like velvet curtains over a stage where nothing hurried to begin. The light from the moon rippled through the water, bending gently as if it, too, was growing tired. The seafloor beyond the window was still the sand, smooth and untouched, coral swaying just slightly. Even the jellyfish, usually glowing bright and curious, drifted slower now, like candle flames dimming before dawn. SpongeBob exhaled deeply, his breath fogging the cool counter. He drew a tiny heart in the mist with one finger, then another, smaller one beside it. The gesture made him giggle softly. "You know," he said, not looking at anyone in particular, "cookies are kind of like dreams." Gary stirred faintly, eyes opening halfway. SpongeBob continued, still tracing invisible shapes in the fog on the counter. "They start all mixed up, sugar, flour, bits of everything. Then you wait, and you wait, and somehow it turns into something warm and perfect." He paused, "just like dreams do." The idea seemed to float in the air around him, like steam that didn't want to fade. He looked at the oven, its little red light blinking lazily in the corner. He smiled faintly. Even the oven dreams. He yawned, long and soft, the kind that makes your eyes water just a little. The kitchen light flickered slightly, as if mimicking the rhythm of his breathing. He slid down from the stool and sat cross-legged on the floor, back leaning against the cabinet. The tiles were cool, the air a soft blend of butter and salt water. The cookie tray sat on the counter above him, glowing faintly in the dim light like a treasure chest of warmth. From this angle, SpongeBob could see his own reflection on the oven's shiny surface. It was blurry, golden, sleepy, his nightcap drooping over one eye. He chuckled faintly at himself. "You look like a melted marshmallow, SpongeBob." The reflection smiled back at him, just as tired. He tilted his head and watched the shadows move across the walls. The refrigerator's hum deepened, echoing softly through the quiet. The rhythm of it started to feel like waves, slow, heavy, constant. SpongeBob closed his eyes for a second, letting that sound carry him. He could almost feel the tide moving beneath him, even though he hadn't left the floor. He imagined himself drifting, not walking, not swimming, just floating. Through the kitchen, past the clock, out the window, into the calm blue beyond. He saw the bubbles rise from his fingertips, the moonlight bending around him like a blanket. In that sleepy moment, everything in the kitchen seemed to breathe with him. The light, the stove, the air. A soft tap brought him back. He blinked. A small cookie crumb had fallen from the counter, landing right on his knee. It glittered faintly in the light, tiny sugar crystals catching the golden hue. He laughed quietly. Guess the cookies don't want to be left alone either. He brushed it off gently and stood up, stretching. The motion felt slow, like moving through honey. He rubbed his eyes again and wandered toward the sink. The water in the faucet gleamed faintly under the light, almost mirror-like. He cupped a handful to his mouth, sipping slowly, the coolness sharp against the buttery air. As he set the cup down, he caught sight of his reflection again, not in the oven this time, but in the water's surface. It shimmered faintly, shifting in ripples. For a second, he thought he saw something else there, too, a faint image of the Pillow Kingdom. From his dreams, the same soft clouds and floating feathers. He blinked, and it was gone. Only his sleepy reflection remained, smiling back at him. He tilted his head. "Maybe the dream's not done yet," he whispered. Gary made a quiet sound, not quite awake, not quite asleep, and SpongeBob smiled. He took another cookie, this one smaller and a little uneven, and placed it beside Gary's bowl. "For later," he murmured, "in case you wake up hungry." Then he picked one more for himself, holding it carefully in both hands like something fragile. He didn't eat it right away. Instead, he just looked at it, the little cracks, the uneven edge, the way one chocolate chip caught the light perfectly. He sighed softly, a sound somewhere between happiness and weariness. "I think the best part of baking," he said to no one, "is when everything's quiet after. When the smell just stays in the air, and it's like the room's still dreaming about what you made." He took a tiny bite, just a nibble, and leaned back against the counter again. The taste wasn't surprising anymore. It was comforting, like the last page of a familiar story. He chewed slowly, eyes half closed, feeling the night fold around him like a soft blanket. The moonlight had shifted, now paler, quieter. The golden glow from the oven had faded, replaced by a soft silver sheen from outside. SpongeBob looked up through the window again. A jellyfish drifted by, glowing faintly pink. Its movements so slow and steady they looked like a lullaby come to life. He smiled faintly. "Good night, little guy," he whispered. The jellyfish pulsed once, twice, and floated upward, disappearing into the vast, sleeping blue. SpongeBob rested his chin on the counter again, feeling his eyes grow heavy. He wasn't tired in a normal way. It wasn't exhaustion. It was a deep, peaceful kind of drowsiness, the kind that happens when everything in the world feels right for a moment. The kitchen was no longer just a kitchen, at least not in the way SpongeBob knew it. The light seemed thicker now, golden but soft, as if the air itself had become syrup. The clock still ticked, steady as always, yet each second felt slower, stretched thin like taffy in the silence. SpongeBob rested both arms on the counter and stared at the half-eaten cookie in front of him. He wasn't thinking about much, not the ingredients, not the recipe, just being. Each crumb looked like a tiny island on a sea of smooth white plate. Some glimmered faintly where the sugar caught the moonlight, others lay in shadow, small mountains of sweetness waiting to dissolve. He took one fingertip and brushed a crumb toward the edge. It tumbled over and fell, landing quietly on the counter, leaving behind a tiny streak of butter. The motion fascinated him. He giggled softly. "Guess gravity still works at midnight," he murmured. Gary made a tiny, lazy noise in response, somewhere between a yawn and a bubble. The clock ticked again. Tick, tick. Each sound echoed gently through the still room as though bouncing off invisible waves. SpongeBob's eyelids drooped lower. It wasn't exactly sleepy, more like melting. Melting into the warmth, into the hush, into the rhythm of the world's quietest night. He looked up at the ceiling, noticing something odd. The light from the oven and the moon had begun to blend into each other, painting faint shapes across the upper corners of the room. At first, they were just streaks, soft and harmless. But then, as SpongeBob blinked, the shapes started to move. A small, fluffy swirl took the shape of a jellyfish. Another formed what looked like a drifting bubble. And then another, which for a moment looked suspiciously like a pillow? SpongeBob smiled, eyes wide in sleepy wonder. "Oh, hello again." The cloud pillow floated above him for a moment before slowly dissolving into thin wisps, fading into the ceiling as though it never existed. SpongeBob laughed quietly under his breath. "Guess I'm seeing things. Too many cookies, huh?" But another shape began to form this time in the reflection on the window. It was faint but unmistakable, a small golden crown resting atop a stack of clouds. He leaned forward, squinting. The Pillow Palace. For a second, the reflection shimmered brighter, the edges glowing with the faintest silver hue. Then, just as quickly, it softened, melting back into the sleepy blue of the ocean outside. He smiled dreamily. Looks like the dream came for a snack, too. He stood up, stretching his arms above his head. The motion made his nightcap slide down to the side, the little tassel swaying like a metronome. The air in the kitchen shifted. Not cooler, not warmer, just different. He could almost feel the boundary between here and there, between waking and dreaming, start to dissolve. The steam rising from the mug on the counter began to curl upward in spirals, moving not like vapor, but like tiny ribbons of silk. They glowed faintly, catching stray beams of moonlight as they drifted toward the ceiling. SpongeBob followed them with his eyes. Each twist of steam seemed alive, twirling, dancing lazily before fading into nothing. He chuckled softly. Even the air wants to dance tonight. He picked up the last cookie from the plate. It was still warm somehow. He turned it in his hand, watching the melted chocolate glisten faintly. He broke it in half. The soft crack of the cookie echoed lightly in the silence. He held one half out toward the darkness. "For you," he said, smiling faintly, "whoever's still awake out there." And though the room gave no answer, he felt something, a warmth, a stillness, as if the night had nodded back. He took his half and bit into it slowly. The sweetness spread across his tongue, mixing with the soft salt of the butter. Every flavor seemed sharper, rounder, almost glowing in his mouth. He sighed through his nose, leaning on the counter again. I think, he mumbled between bites. I think midnight cookies taste better because no one's rushing them. He looked down at Gary, who was now fully asleep, eyes shut tight, little snores coming out in bubbles that floated lazily upward. One bubble drifted toward SpongeBob's face and popped right on his nose. He giggled quietly, rubbing it away. Thanks for keeping me company, buddy. The bubble's faint shimmer lingered in the air for a second, refracting the light into soft rainbow hues that danced briefly before fading. SpongeBob stared at where it had been, entranced. The air felt alive, full of little flickers of light, like crumbs of the moon scattered through the kitchen. He placed his empty plate in the sink with the utmost care, the faintest clink echoing through the silence. Then he wiped his hands on a towel and looked around the kitchen one last time. Everything looked softer now. The corners of the room had blurred slightly. The cabinets seemed rounder, gentler. The shadows felt warmer, as if even they had grown sleepy. He whispered to himself, "It's like the whole kitchen's dreaming." And maybe it was. He stepped closer to the window again. Outside, the ocean was shimmering, but not with sunlight. It glowed faintly from beneath, like the floor of Bikini Bottom had turned into a field of floating stars. He rested his hand on the glass. Tiny vibrations pulsed under his palm, faint, like the heartbeat of the sea. "Good night, everyone," he said softly to the water, to the city beyond, to no one and everyone. A faint pulse of light rippled through the distant coral, as if the ocean itself had whispered back, "Good night, SpongeBob." He smiled, eyes half shut. "See? Even the sea talks back sometimes." He yawned then, deep and slow. His whole body sagged into the motion. The warmth of the cookies, the rhythm of the hums and ticks, the glow of the golden oven, it all began to cradle him like a lullaby. He turned away from the window and walked back toward his stool. Each step felt a little lighter, a little slower. The world was getting softer, as though it were ready to tuck itself in, too. He climbed back onto the stool, curled his legs up, and rested his chin on his knees. The night pressed gently against the window pane. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow softer now, not because it stopped, but because SpongeBob's mind was drifting away from it, into that delicate space between waking and dreaming. He sat perfectly still on the stool, hands folded loosely on his lap, eyes half open but unfocused. The kitchen light swayed slightly, and shadows rippled across the floor like gentle waves. Outside, the ocean shimmered faintly with moving patterns of light, the kind that made you wonder if the sea itself was breathing. SpongeBob blinked slowly. He wasn't tired in the way that comes from work or play. This was a quieter exhaustion, the kind that blooms from warmth, satisfaction, and peace. He inhaled deeply, the smell of sugar and butter still heavy in the air. Each breath felt softer, rounder, slower. The golden glow from the oven had dimmed entirely now, leaving only moonlight pouring through the window, that same soft liquid silver he remembered from his dreams. A single crumb sat on the edge of the counter. He reached out slowly and brushed it away with his finger, watching it fall and disappear against the tiles. As it dropped, the motion left a streak of light just for a moment before fading into the floor. SpongeBob smiled sleepily. "Good night, little crumb." He slid off the stool, moving carefully as though afraid of waking the silence itself. The kitchen floor was cool under his feet, smooth and still faintly sprinkled with flour. Each step left a faint imprint, soft white ovals trailing behind him, fading as quickly as they appeared. The clock on the wall ticked gently. Each second felt like a lullaby note, leading him slowly toward rest. Tick, tick, tick. The air was thick with comfort, heavy and soothing, like the last few seconds before drifting off completely. SpongeBob walked to the oven, placed his palm on the door, and whispered softly, "Thank you for keeping me warm tonight." He didn't know why he said it, it just felt right. As if the oven, too, needed a bit of gratitude for glowing through the dark hours with him. He turned toward the sink, running his finger through a little pile of flour that had spilled earlier. Tiny particles lifted into the air, dancing lazily through the shaft of moonlight that streamed in through the window. They glowed faintly like snowflakes made of sugar, or maybe tiny feathers. SpongeBob tilted his head, a small, sleepy smile curling his lips. Feathers again. The thought made his eyes soften. The feathers swirled gently in the air, catching the light as they rose higher. And for just a second, the kitchen didn't look like the kitchen anymore. The counters began to round off, their sharp corners fading into soft edges. The tiles beneath his feet shifted from solid stone to a quilted pattern, white and pastel yellow squares like stitched pillows. The air grew lighter, warmer, sweeter. He blinked once, twice, and the kitchen became the pillow kingdom again. He stood at the edge of a vast, glowing meadow of fluff. The oven's soft hum turned into a lullaby breeze. The refrigerator's buzz became the distant murmur of waves made of clouds. Even the clock ticked on but slower, like a heartbeat, steady and soothing. SpongeBob looked down at his hands. In one palm rested half of a glowing cookie, radiating a faint golden light. In the other, nothing but soft crumbs that drifted upward, turning into bubbles before disappearing into the sky. He took a small bite, and it tasted just like before. Sweet, buttery, warm, but lighter now, dreamlike. The taste seemed to echo through the air, leaving trails of glowing dust that shimmered like stars. Gary appeared in the distance, floating toward him on a tiny cloud, eyes sleepy but content. He meowed softly, the sound stretched and sweet, like a lullaby played underwater. SpongeBob waved lazily. "Hey, buddy, you found me again." Gary's cloud drifted closer until it stopped right beside SpongeBob's feet. He curled up and closed his eyes immediately, as though he'd been waiting for this moment all night. SpongeBob smiled, then looked around the glowing meadow. The air was filled with tiny golden feathers and gentle bubbles that rose slowly into the night sky. Far beyond, the horizon shimmered with what looked like the faint outline of the Pillow Palace, soft, distant, and inviting. He took another step forward, his slippers sinking slightly into the fluffy ground. Every step made a soft poof sound, like walking on cotton candy clouds. The stars above began to dim, not vanish, just fade into a gentle morning glow. A soft wind passed through, carrying the faint scent of cookies and ocean salt. SpongeBob stretched his arms, letting out a quiet, sleepy laugh. "Well, maybe this is what midnight snacks are really for," he whispered. "Not for filling your belly, but for finding your dreams again." He sat down on the fluff, resting beside Gary. The light of the moon above seemed to pulse in time with his breathing. He leaned back slowly, letting the cloud beneath him shape itself into a pillow. His head sank into it, perfectly fitting, perfectly warm. The half-eaten cookie rested on his chest, still glowing faintly. Tiny crumbs floated upward, shimmering softly as they drifted away, each one turning into a bubble that reflected the dream world around them. He could see reflections in those bubbles, the Krusty Krab, jellyfish fields, his pineapple home all soft, all glowing. The world wasn't separate anymore. It was one calm, endless dream. SpongeBob's eyes fluttered closed. His breathing slowed. The faintest smile curved across his face. The dream deepened, and the pillow kingdom folded gently around him like a blanket. The moon faded into gold, then pink, then the first whisper of dawn. Somewhere, faintly, the sound of the real world began to return, a distant wave, a seagull's cry, the creak of his house waking up. But in this dream, nothing hurried. SpongeBob turned on his side, curling up just slightly. The last crumb of the cookie rolled from his hand, dissolving into a shimmer of light that rose and vanished. "Good night, kitchen," he mumbled softly. His words slurred with sleep. "See you for breakfast?" And as he drifted fully into the glow, the scene held still, a soft, golden sponge, a snail by his side, a dream stitched from warmth, sugar, and quiet light. Then slowly, the glow of the pillow kingdom faded, replaced by the first golden rays of morning in Bikini Bottom. The kitchen returned still, silent, peaceful. The cookie tray rested empty on the counter. The faint hum of Bikini Bottom returned as if it had been waiting for SpongeBob to notice it. The ocean outside his pineapple house breathed slowly, in and out, each wave curling and sighing against the sand in the distance. A soft shimmer of silver moonlight rested over everything, spilling across the kitchen counter where crumbs still sparkled like tiny stars. SpongeBob blinked, slow and drowsy. His cheek rested on the counter, the cool tile faintly pressing against his skin. He didn't remember closing his eyes, but somewhere between the last bite of his cookie and the dream of the clouds he had drifted off. A little snore escaped him, short and cartoonishly round like a bubble popping underwater. Then came a small, questioning sound. Meow? Gary was still beside him, perched on the counter near the empty tray, eyes half-lidded but awake enough to wonder why his owner had fallen asleep in the kitchen. His shell glowed faintly in the moonlight, colors soft and silvery. SpongeBob lifted his head slowly, blinking. "Oh, hey, buddy," he murmured, his voice quiet and hoarse with sleep. "Guess I didn't make it back to bed after all, huh?" Gary blinked once, then yawned, a slow snail yawn that sounded like a sleepy squeak. SpongeBob rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand, the motion lazy and unhurried. His hat, his little nightcap, had slid halfway down his face. He pushed it back, giggling softly. "Heh, midnight chef down for the count." He sat up straighter, stretching his arms with a long, satisfied sigh. The sound of his joints popping was barely audible under the soft hum of the fridge. It was still dark, though if he squinted through the kitchen window, he could see a faint blush of color far on the horizon. The night was loosening its hold. He glanced at the counter. Only a few cookies remained, half a dozen little circles of golden softness, each one still warm enough to scent the air faintly with the vanilla. They looked like tiny moons glowing against the blue tile. "Can't let you go to waste," SpongeBob whispered fondly. He reached for the tray, balancing it carefully in both hands. Gary watched him with slow blinks, like he already knew what was coming. SpongeBob smiled sleepily. "Come on, Gare. Let's take these upstairs before the sun steals the moonlight." He slid off his stool, feet padding softly against the floor. The kitchen light was off now, only the gentle spill of moonlight and the dim gold from the oven timer remained, wrapping the room in a dreamlike calm. Each step he took made the wooden floor creak slightly, not loud, but soft enough to sound like a whisper between the walls. He paused at the doorway to the living room, glancing back once more. The kitchen looked so peaceful, like a memory that didn't want to fade. The flour on the counter shimmered faintly, stirred by a small draft from the window. The empty mixing bowl reflected the last of the moonlight like a still pond. "Good night, kitchen," SpongeBob said softly. "You were perfect tonight." Gary meowed again, this time from the floor, urging him onward. SpongeBob chuckled. All right. Bedtime for chefs." He tiptoed across the living room, balancing the tray in front of him. His pineapple house was completely still. The framed photos on the wall of him and Patrick, of crabs and Squidward, a bubble bass mid-bite, watched over him quietly, their edges glowing faintly under the moonlight filtering through the window. The ticking of a small wall clock filled the room with its patient rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Each tick seemed to slow as he moved through the house, as though time itself was trying to match his drowsy pace. Gary followed, his shell leaving a faint, glimmering trail behind. Nothing messy, just a soft shimmer that faded as quickly as it appeared, like his dreams, here and gone. When SpongeBob reached the stairs, he took a deep breath. One step at a time, he whispered to himself. Don't spill the cookies. He lifted one leg carefully, then the next, his spongy body wobbling slightly but steady enough. His slippers made soft squeaks with each step. Gary trailed behind, his pace unhurried. The house creaked in the way houses do when they know it's late, softly, warmly, without protest. Each floorboard sounded like a sigh, content that its owner was finally heading back to rest. At the top of the stairs, SpongeBob paused. His bedroom door stood slightly ajar, the faint glow of the moon filtering through the crack. Inside, everything was quiet and untouched. His neatly made bed, the nightstand with its tiny lamp, a stack of comic books half hidden under a pillow. He nudged the door open with his elbow, stepping through as carefully as if entering a church. The tray of cookies wobbled slightly in his hands, and he froze mid-step, eyes wide. The cookies steadied. None fell. He exhaled in relief. Crisis averted. Gary glided in behind him, curling near the rug at the foot of the bed. He blinked up once approvingly, before nestling down and tucking his eyes halfway shut. SpongeBob placed the tray gently on the nightstand. The cookies glowed faintly still, their warmth almost fading into a soft, dreamy scent that mingled with the salt of the sea breeze sneaking in from the open window. He looked around his room, the soft drape of the curtains, the moonlight tracing delicate shapes across the walls, the faint shimmer of bubbles floating lazily in the air from earlier that evening's bath. Everything was quiet again. Everything belonged to rest. He sat down on the edge of his bed, feeling the plush bounce under his weight. For a moment he just sat there, hands resting on his knees, eyes half closed. The rhythm of the waves outside synced perfectly with his breathing. Slow in, slow out. Guess it's really late, huh, Gare? He murmured. Gary didn't answer. His eyes were fully closed now. SpongeBob chuckled softly. You beat me to it. He reached for one last cookie from the tray, holding it gently between his fingers. The warmth was almost gone, but it didn't matter. He took a small, slow bite, the crunch barely audible in the stillness. Good night, sweet snack, he said, mouth half full, his words muffled by sleep. The sweetness was familiar, comforting, like a promise that the night still had one dream left to give. He placed the rest of the cookie back on the tray, crumbs scattering softly across the nightstand. In the dim light, they glittered like tiny stars fallen from the sky. The waves outside whispered. The curtains swayed faintly. The clock ticked its steady lullaby. Tick, tick, and tick. SpongeBob lay back slowly, his small frame sinking into the blankets, his nightcap drooping over one eye. The world around him blurred slightly, not from sleep yet, but from the kind of contentment that melts everything sharp into softness, that every slow inhale drew the blankets closer to his chin, and every quiet exhale made them settle, soft and heavy. SpongeBob curled up a little tighter, his arms folding around the edge of his pillow. The nightcap's tassel swayed once before coming to rest on his shoulder. The faint golden light of the cookies reflected gently on his face, warm circles across his cheek and nose, as if the oven's glow had followed him upstairs. Outside, the waves rolled softly over the sandbanks. The sea beyond Bikini Bottom was dark blue fading into lilac. It wasn't dawn yet, not quite, but the first suggestion of it lingered somewhere far away, like a secret being whispered to the horizon. Inside the room, time felt slower, softer. The shadows of the coral furniture curved long and gentle across the floor, the window curtain shifting slightly with the ocean breeze. The movement made little shapes of light slide up the wall, pale, drifting forms, like jellyfish dancing in the shallows. Gary let out a small snore, a sound so light it barely broke the rhythm of the ticking clock. SpongeBob turned his head toward him, smiling faintly. His eyes were half shut now, heavy but content. "Night, Gare," he murmured, barely above a whisper. The snail didn't move. He was already in his own small dream, one of lettuce leaves and slow trails across an endless garden. SpongeBob's breathing deepened. He blinked one last time at the tray beside him. The cookies, now cooled completely, glinting under the faintest hint of morning light. The crumbs on the nightstand shimmered like the distant reflection of stars over water. He smiled at the sight, his little constellation of crumbs, and then, slowly, his eyes closed. The sound of the clock softened. The sound of the ocean grew faint and dreamlike. The boundary between the world and rest dissolved quietly, like sugar melting in tea. And SpongeBob drifted. At first it was simple darkness, not cold or empty, but velvet and weightless. Then faintly came color, the faint blue glow of the ocean, meeting the gold of the stove light, curling together into a soft haze. He was dreaming again. In this dream, the kitchen was still there, but it had changed. The walls were made of soft, glowing bubbles. The counters shimmered like morning dew. The oven's light pulsed gently, in time with the rhythm of his breath. The cookies floated in the air now, orbiting him like tiny moons, leaving trails of gold dust. He giggled softly in his sleep, the sound escaping his lips in the real world as a barely there hum. The cookies drifted past his face, leaving a faint warmth in the air as if the scent itself had shape. He reached out for one, and it crumbled into soft sparkles that wrapped around him like a blanket. Everything glowed. Everything hummed. In the dream, SpongeBob floated halfway between the kitchen and the sea. The two places blended together, and the waves rolling through the floor, the smell of butter mingling with salt and morning breeze. He was happy, utterly and peacefully happy, like a child inside a lullaby. A voice hummed with him, quiet, wordless, part melody and part memory. It was the same rhythm he had hummed while baking earlier, but now it sounded distant, larger, as if the whole ocean had joined in, carrying the tune gently across the sleeping world. He drifted along that sound for what felt like forever. And then slowly, gently light began to creep in. Back in the real world, dawn was starting to rise. The pale gold of morning filtered through the curtains, painting soft lines across the room. The air turned warm, delicate. Dust motes caught the sunlight, glimmering like the cookie crumbs had, like the dream refusing to let go entirely. SpongeBob stirred slightly. He murmured something incoherent, a sleepy chuckle, maybe a fragment of ready to serve, before settling back into stillness. The pillow glowed faintly, just for a moment. Not bright, not magic exactly, but soft enough to seem alive. The glow traveled from under his cheek to the edges of the bedspread, then faded, as though the dream itself was tucking him in. Gary's shell reflected a sliver of that light. He twitched once, eyes opening halfway. His little snail gaze drifted toward SpongeBob, confirming what he already knew: his owner was safe, sound, and deeply asleep. Satisfied, Gary tucked himself further into his shell, curling into a spiral of perfect calm. Outside, the ocean changed color. The blues deepened into pink and orange. Tiny fish silhouettes crossed the light like floating shadows. The first bubbles of the day rose up, catching the sunlight in golden flashes. Inside the pineapple house, the change in color reached the wall, softening the orange hue of SpongeBob's bedroom. The curtains fluttered as a warmer breeze entered, carrying with it the smell of sea salt and coral blooms. The clock on the wall ticked on, but now the rhythm sounded different, lighter, almost musical. The seconds stretched just a little longer, as if time itself was reluctant to disturb the stillness of the room. The cookies remained on the nightstand untouched. One had a perfect bite, missing a little half-moon shape that mirrored the faint crescent of dawn peeking through the window. For a long time, nothing else happened. SpongeBob slept. The world breathed. And the morning waited patiently, spilling its color slowly across the quiet town of Bikini Bottom. From the outside, through the translucent walls of the pineapple, everything glowed like a painting: deep golds, soft blues, traces of lavender mist. The house looked like it was smiling. A bubble floated past the window, catching the sunlight just as it rose higher. For a second it shimmered, then it popped, soundlessly. The echo of SpongeBob's little hum from earlier seemed to hang in the air, soft as memory. The ocean, now fully awake, glittered with life again. Jellyfish drifting lazily, coral fans swaying in gentle rhythm. But inside the house, one corner of night still remained the small shadow under SpongeBob's pillow, where dreams still rested. Gary finally moved again, stretching a little before blinking his sleepy eyes. He looked at the tray of cookies, then at SpongeBob, then back at the cookies. After a moment of quiet decision, he slithered forward, took a single, delicate nibble of one, and sighed contentedly. The sound of waves answered. A beam of sunlight landed on SpongeBob's face, tracing across his smile. He shifted slightly, murmuring a happy sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh, but did not wake. The day had arrived. But the dream wasn't gone. It simply blended into the light. And as the scene slowly widened, the house glowing from within, the water glimmering outside, and the faint hush of the sea whispering around it, all the camera seemed to pull back, drifting through the window, rising over Bikini Bottom. The first thing to stir was the sand. Tiny specks of gold drifted lazily through the water, turning in soft spirals. Then came the corals, flexing, blooming, stretching in the tender glow. A jellyfish floated past SpongeBob's window, its tendrils illuminated in pastel hues. The scene looked like a watercolor painting that had come alive, soft and translucent, every movement deliberate and slow. Inside the pineapple house, the light deepened from gold to peach. The thin curtains lifted slightly with each swell of the ocean. The sound of the waves filtered in, muffled but rhythmic, and the same slow pulse that had followed SpongeBob into his dreams. He lay motionless, bundled under his blanket, his chest rising and falling with the kind of peace that feels earned. The crumb still sat on his cheek. The faint smile had not faded. Gary blinked lazily from his corner, his eyes tilted toward the window, watching the dance of colors outside. He gave a long, contented blink, then turned in a small circle and nestled down again, making a soft spiral mark in the blanket of dust on the floor. The air inside the room shimmered faintly, as if carrying the last breath of the night. The cookies on the nightstand had cooled completely now, but the scent of them, warm, sugary, faintly nutty, still lingered. It mixed with the smell of morning salt, creating a perfect, nostalgic balance, home and horizon. The clock ticked softly on, but slower than before, like it too wanted to savor this hour. SpongeBob stirred slightly. His fingers twitched, brushing the edge of his blanket. For a moment, his lips parted, a half-word formed, something like ready or maybe cookie. Then he sighed again, and the word drifted away like a bubble. A tiny ripple passed across the pillow, almost invisible. It was as if his dream had sent one final wave goodbye before fading completely. The camera of the mind zooms in, his eyelids flutter once, and through them we glimpse fragments of his dream, soft clouds, glowing kitchens, cookies orbiting like planets in a calm, infinite sea. Is not gone, just folded into him like a quiet memory that will stay somewhere deep, surfacing now and then when he hums or bakes. Outside, the town began to stir. A gentle current passed through the jellyfish fields, making the tall grass sway like sleepy dancers. The Krusty Krab's sign flickered faintly in the distance, not quite awake, but thinking about it. Somewhere, Squidward turned in his bed with a groan, pulling his blanket tighter. The world was waking up, but unwillingly, still half in its own dreams. The light shifted again, painting thin golden bars across SpongeBob's floor. The pattern looked almost like the lines of music on a page, as if the sun were writing down the melody of the night's piece before it faded. A soft current drifted through the open window, lifting a few crumbs from the tray. They rose gently into the air, golden motes that spun and shimmered before dissolving into the sunlight. It was as though the dream itself had turned into dust and decided to stay in the air just a little longer. The camera pans upward to the ceiling, where faint glimmers of the Pillow Kingdom still flicker, invisible to anyone awake. They pulse like forgotten stars, fading slowly with every breath of the morning tide. And below them, SpongeBob still sleeps perfectly, peacefully. The narration would be quiet here, like a whisper carried by the waves. Some nights don't end when the sun rises. They just change their light. It's a soft truth that sometimes dreams don't fade. They turn into warmth, into rhythm, into the small, ordinary beauty of a morning. SpongeBob shifts again, turning slightly onto his back. The blanket slides down a little, the pillow puffing beneath him. His breathing deepens once more. The world could spin, and he wouldn't notice. He is cocooned in comfort, an island of stillness in the slow swirl of dawn. Gary glides closer to the bed, pausing at the leg of the nightstand. He looks up, blinking slowly. His eyes catch the reflection of the sunlight and turn golden for a second. He lets out a tiny sound, half meow, half sigh, and curls up near the base of the bed. The room feels alive now, but quietly like a memory breathing. Outside the window, a single bubble rises from the sea floor, floats past the glass, catches the sunlight, and bursts silently, scattering a shimmer that mirrors the fading stars above the ocean. The shot lingers on SpongeBob's room for a long moment. The cookies, the crumbs, Gary's shell, the faint curve of SpongeBob's smile. Then slowly the camera pans outward. The Pineapple House stands still, bathed in early morning light, surrounded by quiet coral gardens and tiny fish that drift lazily by. The rest of Bikini Bottom remains hushed, the early silence before laughter and work and life begin again. The ocean above the town glows faintly, as if reflecting the first beams of sunlight reaching through the surface. Ripples of brightness move like sleepy waves of warmth, brushing over rooftops, street signs, and jellyfish trails. There is no sound now, only the rhythm of water and the whisper of light. The narration would return in a near whisper. Every night has its own kind of magic, and sometimes the softest dreams stay with you long after you've woken up. The camera slowly moves back inside the house. The focus returns to SpongeBob, the small rise and fall of his chest, the crumbs still shining faintly on his cheek. The music, soft and minimal, returns a tender reprise of the lullaby from the kitchen, now played slower, with strings and quiet piano notes. It's not a song anymore, it's a breath, a feeling. The scene holds, quiet and full of light. Even the water outside seems to pause, shimmering in stillness. SpongeBob stirs one last time. A tiny bubble escapes from his lips as he exhales. It floats upward, past the blanket, through the window, and into the brightening ocean. The bubble rises higher and higher, glowing faintly gold. When it reaches the water's surface, it bursts in silence, a final goodbye to the dream. And as it disappears, the sun finally breaks the horizon. The golden light floods the room. The crumbs gleam for a heartbeat before fading into brightness. The pillow softens, the colors warm, and the whole house sighs in perfect calm. Outside, the sea began to breathe. Not loudly, not suddenly, but with a rhythm that belonged to morning itself. A soft tide pressed against coral cliffs, washing away the shimmer of the night. It was as though the ocean had turned over in its sleep and whispered, "Wake." The camera drifts slowly away from SpongeBob's window, floating up through the rippling blue. His pineapple house glows warmly beneath, golden light spilling from the window like honey through water. Tiny fish glide past, their scales reflecting soft rays of sunlight filtering from above. The world outside is just beginning to stir, gentle, deliberate, unhurried. The first jellyfish rise like lanterns, their bell-shaped bodies catching the early gold. They drift lazily over SpongeBob's home, casting rippling shadows that shimmer like a lullaby still being sung. For a moment, the entire sea seems to hum with quiet contentment, as if sharing SpongeBob's peace. The shot pans slowly toward Conch Street. Patrick's Rock sits motionless, a thin beam of sunlight sliding over its surface. From within, a faint snore bubbles up long, steady, the sound of a friend completely lost in his dreams. A starfish arm flops lazily out from beneath the rock, then retreats. Even asleep, Patrick looks content, wrapped in the same calm that holds the ocean itself. Next door, Squidward's house is bathed in faint turquoise light. Curtains flutter gently from an upstairs window. Inside, Squidward lies perfectly still, a faint smile almost imperceptible on his face. In his dreams, he's probably alone on a concert stage, clarinet in hand, performing for an ocean that finally listens. For now, though, he's part of the shared quiet, unwilling to wake, his music playing softly somewhere in his mind. The scene drifts onward. The Krusty Krab sits quiet and empty, the closed sign still hanging in the window. The tables shine faintly under the slant of morning light, and a few leftover crumbs from the night's dinner sparkle like tiny stars on the counter. The grill is cold, but it almost seems to hum, remembering the warmth of yesterday's crabby patties. It, too, rests waiting for the laughter, the noise, the bustle that will come soon enough. Even the chum bucket looks peaceful for once. No neon flicker, no frustrated shouting, just stillness. Inside, Plankton lies curled up on a spoon, a small blueprint draped over him like a blanket. A rare smile rests on his face. Maybe he's dreaming of success, or maybe he's dreaming of not having to try so hard. Either way, it's quiet, and the quiet is kind to him. The ocean stretches wide again. Across Bikini Bottom, bubbles drift lazily upward. The sun's rays pierce the surface, scattering beams that dance like liquid fire through the water. Coral trees sway gently, their fronds glimmering as if sprinkled with light dust. Every shadow moves with grace. It's as if the sea itself remembers how to dream. The narrator's voice returns slow, deep, hushed. Every day begins with the end of a dream. But sometimes, if the night was kind, that dream lingers and becomes the morning. The camera glides back toward SpongeBob's home. The light inside has changed softer now and warmer. The cookies on the nightstand are fewer. Perhaps Gary has quietly helped himself. A few crumbs trail across the floor toward his shell. He hums faintly, his little eyes blinking in slow rhythm. SpongeBob's blanket has shifted. One arm is now free, dangling loosely from the bed. His fingers twitch gently, perhaps chasing something inside a dream. He breathes deep, the sound of perfect rest. The shot moves in closer. The crumb on his cheek still catches the sunlight, a tiny, glittering reminder of warmth. It's small, but it means everything. The last trace of a midnight moment. Something real that the dream left behind. Outside, the light grows brighter, yet it doesn't disturb. The warmth doesn't wake him. It wraps around him instead, like a hand tucking him in once more. Even the waves seem to hush for him. And then, almost imperceptibly, the morning song begins. A low, melodic hum from far away, perhaps a whale call, perhaps the ocean itself singing. The sound fills the space, soft and resonant, as though the sea is giving its blessing to the new day. The camera tilts upward. Beyond the waves, the surface of the ocean gleams like molten glass. The sun's reflection stretches wide, a path of gold leading endlessly across the horizon. Above, faint silhouettes of seagulls glide past, their shadows rippling on the water's surface. It's quiet enough to believe that time has stopped, that this morning could last forever. The narration continues, almost like a lullaby for the world itself. Peace doesn't always come from stillness. Sometimes it comes from knowing you've done enough, that the day and the dream can rest in each other's arms. Cut to a wide shot of SpongeBob's street, Conch Street, bathed in golden blue light. Bubbles rise and fall in the distance. Everything feels timeless, neither night nor day, just a moment suspended in between. Then gently, we fade into a soft montage, the seagrass bending in slow motion, a lone jellyfish drifting toward the horizon, Gary's shell catching a gleam of morning gold, the reflection of SpongeBob's window glowing brighter until it almost looks like a tiny sun. The music swells faintly, the same lullaby from the oven scene, now fully transformed. What was once a sleepy hum has become a quiet hymn of peace strings, piano, faint chimes echoing through the water. The final narration hums softly over it. And somewhere in that small, warm house, a sponge dreams of cookies and oceans and friends. The waves outside keep their rhythm, and the world keeps spinning. But for now, everything is still and safe and home. The camera pulls back one last time. We see the entire town now, Bikini Bottom, glowing beneath the slow sunrise. The outlines of coral houses, glowing kelp, the faint trails of waking jellyfish. Good night, Bikini Bottom.